Hey guys, CrumbleBob here again. Today I've got a whole bunch of stories about betrayal and cheating. Now I know you might be thinking this isn't exactly the most relaxing bedtime topic, but trust me, these fiery stories are worth it. So wrap yourself up in a blanket and dive into the madness. I'm still in shock as I write this. 3 days ago, my entire life imploded, and I'm trying to make sense of what occurred by putting it all down. This is hard to even type out. I never imagined I'd be one of those guys posting their relationship disasters on Reddit. I'm using Mark and Sarah as our names because those appear to be the common fake names on this sub, and I'm paranoid about anyone we know linking this to us. Even though the situation is so insane, I'm pretty sure anyone who was there would recognize it instantly. I suppose I should start by saying that until 3 days ago, I thought I had a decent marriage. Not perfect, whose is, but stable. We had plans for the future, but I guess that fell apart. For context, my wife Sarah has always had. Let's call it an intense personality. When she doesn't get her way or someone challenges her ideas, she goes from 0 to 100 real quick. She talks fast, gets loud, sometimes throws small objects, slams doors, and basically acts like a hurricane until people bend to her will. Then she'll give you the silent treatment until she gets what she wants. I've tolerated this for years because I loved her, and honestly, I simply grew accustomed to appeasing her to sidestep conflict. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I do. But you know how it goes. You don't notice the water getting hotter until you're already boiling. After 10 years together, I'd developed all these coping strategies, all these methods of attempting to maintain harmony. I'd learned to foresee her moods, to spot the initial signs of a brewing storm, and do whatever I could to de-escalate it before it erupted. I should provide a couple of examples before I get to the main event, just so you understand what I was dealing with all these years. 3 years ago, we were planning some significant renovations on our house. Nothing too extravagant, updating the kitchen, redoing the master bath, that kind of thing. We'd been saving for it for years, and I was eager to finally make our house feel more like ours instead of just the starter home we purchased. Sarah took charge of the project immediately, which was fine with me since she's always had a better eye for design. But then she chose a contractor she liked without doing any comparison shopping. She just decided this guy was the one based on a single meeting where he apparently charmed the pants off her. When I reviewed their quote, which was well over our budget, I noticed some red flags. The timeline seemed far too optimistic. They were claiming they could gut and rebuild our entire kitchen in like 2 weeks, which anyone who's ever done renovations knows is laughable. Plus, the materials section was suspiciously unclear. Simply premium countertops and high-quality cabinetry without any specifics about brands, models, or even materials. I'd read enough renovation horror stories on Reddit to know this was a formula for disaster. So I gently proposed we get a couple more estimates to compare. I wasn't implying she made a poor decision. I just thought it was the sensible thing to do with such a significant investment. Well, you'd have thought I'd suggested we set the house on fire. She instantly erupted. She began yelling that I was undermining the project, that I lacked faith in her judgment, and that she'd handle everything herself. She said I always behaved this way, always identifying issues with her ideas, always attempting to make her feel foolish. Then she stormed out and gave me the silent treatment for 2 days. 2 full days of her acting like I was invisible in our own home, all because I proposed obtaining multiple estimates for a major house renovation. I eventually convinced her about seeking another perspective, mostly by leaving renovation horror stories open on my laptop where she could happen to notice them. We finally obtained a second quote, and surprise, surprise, the first contractor was significantly overpriced with an impractical schedule. The second company highlighted numerous problems the first guy had overlooked. Sarah chose the second company, but never admitted her error or apologized for her outburst. She just acted as if the entire argument hadn't occurred, and continued as though going with a second contractor had been her original intention. I was so greatly relieved we weren't getting scammed that I didn't press the issue. I just added it to the mental list of battles not worth fighting. On another occasion, about 18 months ago, we were organizing our yearly holiday. It was my turn to choose the destination. We'd always alternated, a method that functioned well for us. We had previously discussed doing something outdoors oriented, perhaps a cabin near a national park with some excellent hiking paths. We both enjoy nature, or at least I believed we both did. Sarah had always appeared to have a pleasant time on our prior hiking excursions. We'd spend our evenings by the campfire, sipping wine and conversing for hours beneath the stars. Those were some of my most cherished memories of our relationship, actually. I'd been researching possibilities for months, had an entire folder of bookmarks on my laptop, reasonably priced cabins near Yosemite, guided hiking tours, even a place that would provide gourmet meal kits to your cabin so we could cook together without needing to plan everything ourselves. I was truly enthusiastic about it, kept dropping subtle hints about what I was arranging, and Sarah seemed keen, asking questions and appearing to anticipate it. But then, unexpectedly, she came home one day waving a travel magazine. She'd read about some opulent resort in the Caribbean, with private plunge pools and personal butlers and heaven knows what else. Suddenly, that's where we were headed, even though it was far beyond our agreed vacation budget, like 3 times what we'd intended to spend. When I reminded her about the outdoor arrangements I'd been developing for months, and softly brought up the budget concern, she went ballistic. She began yelling that I was being difficult on purpose and trying to deprive her of experiences everyone else gets to have, claiming that all our friends got to go on fancy vacations. Not true. And that I was embarrassing her by being cheap. Also not true. I'm just responsible with our money. She threw a decorative pillow across the room, knocking over and breaking a picture frame with our wedding photo in it, which felt symbolic, looking back on it now, and declared the outdoor trip wasn't happening. She said she'd book the fancy hotel herself if I was going to be such a killjoy. Then she slammed our bedroom door so hard a painting fell off the wall and ignored me for hours. I ended up sleeping on the couch, and when I tried to bring it up the next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. The next day, she booked the resort, charging it to our joint credit card before I could object further. I didn't fight it because what was the point? She'd already made up her mind, and I knew from experience that continuing to resist would just lead to days or weeks of tension and passive-aggressive jabs. We went to the fancy hotel. It was nice, I guess, but I couldn't enjoy it knowing what it cost us and how we ended up there. This pattern repeated over and over throughout our marriage. I'd question or disagree with something, she'd have a dramatic outburst, give me the silent treatment, then do whatever the hell she wanted anyway. I typically just expressed my view calmly, observed her erupt, then ultimately went along with her plans because it was simpler than managing the repercussions. Our friends would joke about how Sarah ran the show in our relationship. They'd nudge me and utter phrases like, "Happy wife, happy life, right, Mark?" And I'd laugh along with them because what other choice did I have? Confess that I feared my own wife's temper, that I'd fundamentally abandoned trying to be an equal partner in my own marriage because it wasn't worth the emotional conflict. I can recognize how unhealthy the entire dynamic was, but you know how it is. When you're immersed in it, it merely becomes your norm. You acclimate, you conform, you convince yourself every relationship possesses its peculiarities. I truly loved her, and we also had pleasant times, but the perpetual treading on eggshells, the unforeseeable outbursts, the feeling that my views and inclinations always took a back seat, it exhausted me over the years. I didn't grasp the extent until everything collapsed. Now, for what occurred 3 nights ago, the evening that shattered my marriage, and any remaining illusions I held about my wife's true nature. We were commemorating our 10th anniversary with around 50 guests at this pleasant downtown event venue that we'd hired for the evening. Sarah had managed most of the arrangements, which was acceptable to me. The attendee list comprised our closest friends, several of my colleagues, and Sarah's family, her parents, and her two younger brothers. My own family resides abroad. My parents retired to Portugal a few years ago, and my sisters live in Australia, so they couldn't attend, which now feels like a blessing in disguise. At least they were spared witnessing the debacle in person. The evening had been progressing well up to that point. The food was excellent, the bar was open, people were mingling and enjoying themselves. Several guests had offered short toasts during dinner, sharing memories and congratulating us. Sarah appeared happy, was being affectionate with me, holding my hand under the table, leaning in to whisper jokes about the speeches. After dinner concluded, I was about to go up to this small stage area to thank everyone for coming. I'd prepared a brief speech expressing my gratitude to our guests and saying a few kind words about Sarah and our decade together. But before I could make my way up there, Sarah suddenly walked up on stage with her boss, David. I had no idea he was even coming to the party. He hadn't been on the guest list we'd discussed. Apparently, he showed up about an hour into the event after Sarah had briefly left and returned with him. Her family looked surprised to see him too. I caught her dad giving her mom a confused look when David walked in. Sarah grabbed the microphone from the stand and the room grew quiet as people turned to look at her. She had this strange smile on her face. Not her usual warm smile, but something different, almost triumphant. She started talking about how tonight was a celebration, but not just of our 10 years together. It was about a new path for her. I remember feeling a twinge of confusion, but assumed she was talking about a job promotion or something. Then, with absolutely no warning, she announced that she was leaving me. The room went dead silent. Everyone was looking back and forth between us, completely shocked. I felt like someone had just knocked all the air out of my lungs. My brain couldn't process what was happening, like the words didn't make sense together. Sarah and leaving me were concepts that couldn't occupy the same space in my universe. I kept thinking there must be some mistake, that I'd misheard, or that this was some kind of bizarre joke. But then she kept going, and it got so much worse. She pointed to David standing beside her. He's about 10 years older than us, divorced twice already from what I'd heard, and said she was leaving me for him because she had found someone better, someone who was truly man enough to give me what I want, which is a baby and building a family. Those words, man enough, cut through me like a knife. We'd been trying for a baby for the last few years without success, and I'd recently found out I had some fertility issues. It was something I was still grappling with, something deeply personal that we'd only shared with our nearest family members. And there she was, tossing it in my face in front of everyone we knew. She concluded by saying, "This is happening now. This is my choice, and I am moving forward with it." In this chilly, resolute voice I barely recognized, like she was announcing a business decision instead of shattering a decade-long marriage. I simply stood there, frozen. It felt like I'd been struck in the gut. No, worse, like I'd been struck by a truck and was somehow still standing. I couldn't breathe. My face felt hot, then cold. The room seemed to tilt and sway around me. I looked around at all these people gazing at me with pity and shock. Friends who had just been congratulating us. Co-workers who would now have this as their foremost memory of me. Sarah's family who looked as taken aback as I felt. Then I looked back at Sarah, standing proudly next to her fucking boss. This guy who'd been in our home for dinner parties, who'd shaken my hand and looked me in the eye while apparently sleeping with my wife behind my back. My mind was racing, attempting to figure out when this might have begun, how long it had been unfolding, how I could have overlooked all the signs. We'd had dinner together just the night before, talking about the party details. She'd kissed me goodbye that morning before work. How do you go from that to publicly humiliating your husband of 10 years? What kind of person does that? Before I could even start to craft a reply, Sarah's father suddenly stood up from his table. He pointed at Sarah and said, "Your conduct is disgraceful, Sarah. The things you are saying about Mark are damaging and false, and doing this in front of everyone is exceedingly disrespectful. Her mother stood up next and added, "We did not raise you to act this way. We do not support what you are doing, not in the slightest." But her father wasn't finished. He delivered the ultimate strike. "Because of your actions tonight, the way you've embarrassed your husband and yourself, we consider you to have severed ties with this family. We disown you, Sarah." All four of them nodded in agreement and walked out of the venue, not even glancing back when Sarah called out to them. I've known Sarah's family for over a decade. They're traditional but loving people, strong on family loyalty and doing what's right. I'd never seen them like this, so united in their disgust and disappointment. I think that's when the reality of what was happening truly registered with me. If even her own family, who had always supported and loved her unconditionally, were abandoning her over this, then what she'd done was truly beyond the pale. Sarah clearly hadn't expected that reaction. She started screaming after them, her voice high-pitched and panicked, though I couldn't discern her precise words over the blood rushing in my ears. David tried to place his hand on her arm in what looked like an attempt to calm her down, but she yanked it away violently. In that moment, she looked completely unhinged, a far cry from the confident woman who had just announced she was leaving me for a better man moments earlier. I finally snapped out of my shock. A strange calm came over me as I walked up to the stage. I think it was my brain's way of protecting me, shutting down all emotions so I could function. I kept my voice perfectly level, cold even, as I looked both of them in the eye and said, "You need to leave. Now." I could hear how different my voice sounded, like it belonged to someone else. David, that smug bastard, actually had the nerve to try to smooth things over. He began to say, "Mark, we need to talk." But I cut him off mid-sentence. "No, we don't. You both need to get the fuck out of here before I punch your nose in. Right now." I pointed toward the eggs that her family had used. Something in my look must have indicated to them I wouldn't repeat it a third time. They shared a glance, then left the stage for a close table where their personal items were. After they left, 50 people, and not a word was spoken. Just shocked faces gazing at me, waiting to see what I would do next. My boss was there with his wife, some of my oldest friends. People who had known us as a couple for our whole relationship. I felt obligated to say something to offer some closure to this utter disaster of an evening. I walked back to the stage area. I cleared my throat and said, "I think the party is clearly over. I'm sorry it had to end this way." My voice cracked a little, but I managed through it. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate your support." What else could I say? "Surprise, my wife's been deceiving me with her boss, and I discovered it when you did. Or don't worry, I'm only dying inside." There was nothing that could redeem the situation, no words that could help any of us forget what had just happened. People started collecting their belongings, muttering to each other, giving me these terrible looks of pity as they made for the exit. A few of my nearest friends came up to me, clumsily patted my shoulder or gave me brief hugs, whispering phrases like, "Call if you need anything," or "I'm so sorry, man." I nodded automatically, thanked them, but I couldn't truly take in anything they were saying. It was like I was underwater, everything muffled and distant. Within about 30 minutes, the place was empty save for the venue staff, who were visibly uncomfortable and trying to be as unobtrusive as possible as they began cleaning up. I stayed to help with the initial cleanup, partly because it was in our rental agreement, but mostly because I needed something to do, some ordinary task to focus on, while my brain tried to catch up with reality. The venue manager kept giving me these sympathetic looks, which somehow made everything worse. I paid the remaining balance we owed, signed whatever paperwork she placed before me, and finally left. When I got home and walked into our empty house, it hit me all over again. 10 years of marriage, gone. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed we'd shared for a decade, and finally broke down. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I pulled myself together enough to check my phone. I had a flood of texts from Sarah. Her messages were all over the place, shocked by her family's reaction. I can't believe they would do this to me. Acknowledging the announcement was a mistake, but not backing down on leaving me. I shouldn't have done it that way. But you have to understand, I need to move on. Proposing we talk or see a counselor, we should sit down with someone who can help us through this transition. Asserting it was a cry for help, without explaining what help she needed, or why she'd choose to cry for help by publicly humiliating me, and then somehow trying to blame me for her decision to leave. If you had been more attentive, if you had taken my needs more seriously, it wouldn't have come to this. The messages constantly shifted in tone and content, like she was desperately throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. One minute, she was the victim of her cruel family. The next, she was generously offering to talk things through with me. Then she was the party in the wrong who had been driven to extreme measures by my failings as a husband. It was classic Sarah, incapable of taking responsibility for her actions, always seeking a way to spin the narrative so she came out looking better. But this time, there was no spinning it. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I didn't reply to any of them or answer her calls. I decided to contact the divorce lawyer the next morning and scheduled an appointment to begin the formal process of ending our marriage. I'm writing this to document what happened, not to inquire if what I'm doing is right. I know what I need to do. I'm writing this to document what happened, not to ask if what I'm doing is right. I know what I need to do. I'm just trying to make sense of how my life fell apart so completely in one night. Update 1 week later. Thanks for all the comments on my first post. Some of you asked for further details about the party and Sarah's family's reaction, so I'll clarify a few things. The party took place in a private room we rented for the evening. Sarah's parents and brothers had been there from the beginning, sitting at a reserved table near the stage area. My family couldn't attend because they live overseas. David, Sarah's boss, wasn't on the guest list. He showed up roughly an hour in after Sarah had briefly left and returned with him. Her family also seemed surprised to see him, based on their reactions. For those asking about Sarah's precise words, I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, "Everybody, I have something to tell you. Tonight is not only about being married for 10 years. It is about a new course for me. I am leaving Mark. I am leaving Mark for David." She gestured at him. "I found someone who is better for me, someone who is truly man enough to give me what I want, which is a baby and building a family. This is happening now. This is my choice, and I am moving forward with it. My decision to file for divorce immediately was based purely on these facts. She publicly ended our marriage, embarrassed me before everyone we knew, declared she was with another man, and uttered harsh, false statements about me. The fact that her own family responded so forcefully and severed connections with her demonstrated the gravity and unpardonable nature of her actions. Her messages subsequently were merely damage control. They provided no true explanation or displayed any genuine regret. The morning following the party, I consulted a divorce attorney, recounted all that occurred, furnished the required details about our marriage, finances, and assets, and instructed him to ready the divorce documents. He submitted the petition for marital dissolution, which I endorsed, and arranged for a process server to hand over the documents to Sarah at our home, where she was still residing then. As soon as Sarah was served, her messages grew more numerous and hostile. She persistently demanded I retract the divorce petition, asserted I lacked the right to initiate divorce, maintained the party event was merely an error I was exaggerating, and switched between menacing me and disparaging me. She even dared to claim I was attempting to destroy her life, as though she hadn't just shattered our marriage in the most public and embarrassing manner imaginable. I did not reply to any of her communications, but preserved them all and sent the menacing ones to my attorney. I directed him to inform Sarah's lawyer, yes, she promptly hired one, that all forthcoming communication regarding the divorce needed to pass through our attorneys. I'm finished speaking to her personally. So that's the current situation. Divorce proceedings have formally commenced. We're conversing exclusively via our lawyers, and I'm attempting to mend my life. 7 months later. It's been some time since my prior update, and much has occurred. The divorce is now complete, and I'm at last beginning to feel like I can breathe once more. After Sarah received the divorce papers and retained her own lawyer, she submitted her reply to the petition for dissolution. Within it, she conveniently omitted the true cause for our separation. You know, her public declaration in embarrassment of me, and possessed the nerve to seek alimony. Fucking alimony. After openly discarding me for another man and stating I wasn't man enough to provide her with a baby. Her plea for spousal support was founded on income difference and the duration of our marriage, but conveniently overlooked the conditions that brought about our separation. It was as if she believed she could rewrite history and feign she was the victim somehow. At roughly the same time, I began to learn from mutual friends that Sarah was reaching out to them and presenting a distinct version of events, attempting to portray herself as the wronged party. The blend of her demanding my money in court while simultaneously seeking to harm my reputation was the final breaking point. When my lawyer presented me with her alimony request, we talked about how courts in our state deal with these kinds of situations. While judges mainly consider elements such as the marriage's duration and disparities in income, the details surrounding the separation can occasionally also be taken into account. My lawyer dispatched a formal letter to Sarah's attorney, indicating that if she kept on seeking alimony, I would present thorough evidence concerning the conditions of our separation. This would encompass sworn declarations from me and potentially witness accounts detailing precisely what transpired at the anniversary party, her public declaration about leaving me for her boss, the exact words she employed to embarrass me, and her family's prompt and severe response, including their public disavowal of her. We didn't issue any threats beyond the legal process. We merely outlined what evidence would be put forward in court if she persisted in seeking alimony. Everything was transparent and by the rules. The impact was instant. Within days, Sarah's lawyer notified mine that she was retracting her request for spousal support. They submitted the formal documents soon after, formally eliminating the alimony claim from the divorce case. I've learned via rumor that things haven't progressed favorably for Sarah since that evening. Roughly 2 months after the party, she departed from, or was terminated from, her position at the company where David served as her boss. Evidently, she hasn't managed to secure similar employment since that time. Her financial standing worsened considerably, and she was compelled to relocate with one of her cousins because she could not pay for her own dwelling. Her family has upheld their stance and has not mended relations with her since the anniversary party, which restricted her network of support. So here's how everything unfolded chronologically. Sarah openly terminated our marriage at our anniversary party. Her family disowned her immediately. I initiated divorce proceedings the next day. She sought spousal support. I indicated I would furnish comprehensive evidence about her behavior. She retracted the spousal support claim. She was dismissed from her job, and she was obliged to move in with a relative owing to monetary difficulties. The divorce is now concluded. We came to an accord regarding the division of our assets, which was comparatively uncomplicated considering our financial situation, and the court granted the decree formally ending our marriage. Sarah is no longer employed at her former job, receives no assistance from me, and resides with her cousin. Her current situation is markedly distinct from her circumstances prior to these events. We have no further direct communication. All matters are handled by our lawyers, if necessary, which is infrequent now that the divorce is complete. As far as I know, her family has not altered their position and continues not to communicate with her. I will not be providing further updates about this situation. It is concluded, and I am at last beginning to advance with my life. The past 7 months have been the most challenging of my life. For those curious about David, it seems he and Sarah didn't last long after her dramatic declaration of love. I heard they broke up around the same time she departed the company, but I don't know the specifics, and frankly, I don't care. I want to thank everyone who offered support and counsel through this nightmare. Your comments helped me stay strong when I was tempted to yield to Sarah's demands just to make the pain stop. I'm in a much better place now, and I'm looking forward to whatever comes next. Now, this next one will really shock you. Okay, this will be lengthy. I needed a spot to write this down, to get it out. I'm not seeking comfort or advice. When I met Melissa, I had very little. An entry-level job, student loan debt, renting a small apartment with flatmates. Her family, conversely, had money. Not private jet every week wealthy, but comfortable, established. They owned property, operated a successful local business, lived in a large house in an affluent neighborhood. There was a clear difference in our financial situations. We dated for about a year. Things appeared good between us. When we began discussing marriage, that's when the other elements entered the picture. Melissa's parents, particularly her father, were deeply involved in her life and decisions. They weren't immediately hostile, but they were direct about their concerns regarding my financial state relative to Melissa's and their families. The word broke wasn't spoken to my face initially, but the implication was clear. They stated that Melissa was accustomed to a certain lifestyle and that they had built their wealth through careful planning and protection. Marriage, they explained, involved combining lives and assets, and they needed assurances regarding their daughter's financial security and the potential impact on any future inheritances or family business interests. Their solution was a prenuptial agreement. This wasn't offered as an option or a suggestion. It was a requirement for the marriage to go forward with their approval and financial backing for the wedding itself. They supplied a lawyer, or rather they insisted I use a lawyer. They suggested to review the document, stressing fairness. I grasped that this lawyer's main allegiance was likely to their interests, or at least to the family's general wish for the agreement to be signed without much resistance. They did mention I could consult my own independent counsel, but time was short with wedding plans, and much pressure was involved in the process. I was in my mid-20s. I didn't have much experience with legal documents of this scope. I certainly couldn't afford to engage a high-powered lawyer to negotiate against their legal representation. The lawyer they supplied appeared competent, but mainly clarified the clauses without recommending I object or negotiate terms substantially. The agreement was clear in its objective. Should a divorce occur, I would not be entitled to any of Melissa's premarital assets, any inheritance she got, or any rise in value of her separate property. Significantly, and a point they stressed repeatedly, I would also not be entitled to any portion of future assets I gained during the marriage that could be traced back to my income or investments, beyond a very restricted specific set of conditions that were hard to satisfy. Essentially, what was hers stayed hers. What I gained was mostly mine and stayed distinct, and I had no right to marital property division in the usual way if the assets could be traced back to my work or investments. Spousal support was also covered. It was either completely waived or limited to a very small sum for a brief period, specifically intended for a scenario where Melissa might require minimal temporary aid, not a lasting demand on my earnings. I reviewed the document. Its purpose was obvious. My financial standing at that moment meant I possessed no assets to safeguard. The prospect of amassing substantial wealth appeared far off, a distant potential rather than an immediate fact. The compulsion to sign was enormous. The wedding arrangements were moving forward. Melissa appeared to accept it as a regrettable necessity for her family's reassurance, and I felt I had no bargaining power. My choices were to sign and marry Melissa with her family's consent, or decline, possibly ending the relationship or marrying without her family's backing, which would have generated considerable strife from the outset. I affixed my signature to the prenuptial agreement. It was properly witnessed and carried out. The initial few years of our marriage were financially constrained, as anticipated. I remained in my entry-level position while beginning to investigate other paths to boost my earnings. Melissa worked part-time at first, then shifted to overseeing the household, as my career started to require more of my time. Her family never brought up the prenup again. It was a signed document, simply put away. My attention turned largely to building something of my own. I wasn't content with the speed of progress in my corporate job. I began working on a side venture in the tech sector. It meant long hours, evenings, weekends, putting back what little spare income we possessed. Melissa managed the household, and we kept up a relatively modest way of life despite her family's background. We resided in a small house, drove older vehicles. There was no financial aid from her family beyond occasional presents, and certainly nothing that amounted to substantial joint assets. My undertaking was purely my effort, my time, my risk, and whatever small capital I could gather or borrow. This side venture began gaining momentum. It was an overnight success. It required years of steady effort, learning, adapting. I eventually quit my full-time job to pursue it entirely. This was a risk we talked about. It meant a period with no guaranteed income. Melissa backed this choice verbally. Though her family voiced worries about the absence of a steady paycheck, I kept at it. The business expanded slowly at first, and then picked up speed. I found a market segment, built a team. Profits were put back in to drive further growth. Around the 5-year point of our marriage, the business achieved a substantial valuation. It wasn't just income. We were profitable, growing and drawing investor interest. My personal equity in the company, along with additional investments I made using the profits, began to represent substantial wealth. This was wealth created wholly by my endeavors and my business's expansion after our marriage. The extent of my financial position started to exceed Melissa's family's. I had become, by most standards, a millionaire. This reality grew more and more obvious as our lifestyle gradually improved, though we still kept some discretion regarding the precise amounts. We relocated to a bigger home in a nice area, some discretion regarding the precise amounts. We journeyed more frequently. Melissa ceased working entirely. She devoted herself completely to managing our ever-expanding household. The change in our interactions was apparent. Her parents, who had once regarded me with financial doubt bordering on scorn, grew more curious about my business and its results. Their disposition toward me shifted. The man who had no money when he married their daughter was now plainly affluent. They began involving me more in their financial discussions, inquiring about investments, commending my business shrewdness. The prenup, the document they had demanded to shield their daughter from my financial destitution, was never spoken of. Our marriage, however, started to experience tension amidst this time of increasing prosperity and my rigorous work routine. My focus stayed largely on the business. Melissa relished the financial benefits, but appeared less connected to the person who had built it. Our paths diverged. She had her social life. Her interests revolved around overseeing the new house and lifestyle. My interests were still deeply tied to the business world, to innovation, to building further. Communication grew transactional, often centered on household management or social obligations. Affection and shared goals lessened. Then, about 10 years into our marriage, matters shifted. I started to observe changes in Melissa's behavior. She was frequently distant, secretive with her phone, unreachable at times she typically wasn't. When I attempted to discuss these alterations, she grew defensive or dismissive. It wasn't a sudden dramatic disclosure, but a gradual suspicion based on accumulated minor observations. The complete picture surfaced later, not from a confession by Melissa, but via details that reached me indirectly. Melissa was involved in an affair with another man. He was an individual she had encountered through the social circles she now frequented. He also originated from affluence, established family money, which appeared a notable element in her view of him. This liaison had seemingly been continuing for some time. The circumstances intensified swiftly once I learned of the affair. Melissa's family, who had previously viewed my wealth positively, abruptly reverted to their initial protective stance, but with a different objective. They found out about the affair, and their immediate worry was Melissa's financial prospects, especially given a probable divorce. The man she was involved with was not, from what I understood, seeking a second wife or a lasting commitment beyond the affair. He was married himself, and his main home was in another state. This likely fueled her family's concern about her situation if our marriage ended. Their method was not understated. Melissa's father contacted me personally, requesting a meeting. He declared it was urgent and concerned the family's welfare. I consented to meet him and Melissa's mother at their residence. The meeting was not agreeable. They brought up the condition of my marriage with Melissa, admitting they were aware of the difficulties in Melissa's relationship with the other man. They voiced concern for both of us, but quickly shifted to the meeting's purpose, the prenuptial agreement. Her father spoke first. He admitted the agreement was in place and that he had pushed for it years ago. He then explained that circumstances had changed significantly since the agreement was signed. He mentioned my success, the wealth I had gathered. He claimed the purpose of the prenup was to protect Melissa from marrying someone penniless and unable to support her. Now that I was well able to provide, and had in fact built up substantial assets during the marriage, he contended that the initial basis of the agreement was invalidated. He stated it was no longer fair or applicable in our present financial situation. He then suggested a plan. He wished for me to agree to jointly cancel the prenuptial agreement. He proposed we sign a new document, or simply destroy the current one and go forward with a standard divorce, if that's what Melissa wanted. His reasoning was that without the prenup, Melissa would be eligible for half of our marital assets, under standard state divorce laws. He presented this as the right thing to do, considering my financial status and the years Melissa had spent as a stay-at-home wife, implicitly supporting my career by managing the home. He did not mention the affair as a factor that might make her claims difficult. He focused solely on my wealth and the supposed unfairness of the prenup now that I had it. Melissa was at this meeting. She said little, mostly allowing her parents to speak. When asked, she mentioned she felt the agreement was old-fashioned and didn't mirror our current lives. She showed no regret for the affair or worry for the marriage itself, only that she thought she deserved a share of the assets I had accumulated throughout our marriage. The message was evident. She wished to end the marriage, be with the other man, or at least be free to chase that, and obtain a significant financial payout from me based on my present wealth. My reply was straightforward. I heard their points. Once they concluded, I stated plainly that the prenuptial agreement constituted a legally enforceable contract. Lawyers prepared it, counsel reviewed it, supposedly fairly, and both Melissa and I signed it with complete understanding of its terms and consequences at the time, including how it applied to assets acquired in the future. I reminded them they were the ones who had pushed for its creation and its conditions, specifically because I had no money, and to shield Melissa from any claim I might make on their fortune or her pre-marriage assets. The agreement, I highlighted, was crafted precisely for a scenario where one individual amassed wealth on their own during the marriage. It did not contain provisions that would void it if I grew wealthy. Its conditions were meant to cover all possibilities, including the one that had now occurred. I stated that I had fulfilled my part of the marriage by working and providing, and I anticipated the legal agreement we both signed would be honored. I told them that I would not agree to cancel the prenup, nor would I agree to a settlement beyond its conditions. I made it clear that any divorce would move forward with the prenuptial agreement completely valid. The response from Melissa and her parents was disbelief and fury. They had evidently thought I would give in to their demands, perhaps out of a sense of duty, fear of conflict, or some mistaken idea of gallantry. Melissa's father's tone changed from convincing discussion to indirect menaces. He spoke of possible long court fights, public shame, and the expense of legal costs, suggesting they would involve me in lawsuits to overturn the prenup. I restated my stance. The agreement was clear I would uphold it, and I had already spoken with my own separate attorney, who focused on protecting prenuptial agreements. I stood up, declared the meeting finished, and left their house. After this meeting, the situation worsened even more. Melissa started divorce procedures. Her lawyers, clearly directed by her parents and their funds, promptly showed their aim to dispute the legitimacy of the prenuptial agreement. Their arguments were similar to what her father had presented. The agreement was unfair because of the shift in situation. By gaining wealth, I had somehow forced Melissa to sign it, even though she had legal advice, a tough claim to make since it was their concept and their suggested lawyer, or that the conditions were simply unjust currently. They pursued substantial alimony and a big share of my assets as if the prenup wasn't there. My legal team was ready. We submitted our reply, affirming the full legitimacy of the prenuptial agreement. We supplied documents from when it was signed, including evidence she had access to legal representation, declarations from her parents showing their demand for the agreement, and the agreement itself with signatures. We contended that the shift in my financial standing was precisely the kind of situation the agreement was made to handle. It assigned risk and expectations concerning future income and asset growth. We emphasized that Melissa had been completely aware of the conditions and had signed willingly. We also noted, factually and without too much detail, the events prompting the divorce filing, including the affair, not as reasons to deny her based on blame, which isn't always pertinent in divorce agreements depending on the state, but as background for the marriage's collapse happening while she was trying to set herself up for a financial benefit against the current agreement. The legal proceedings required time. There were legal documents, requests, and required mediation efforts that achieved nothing because Melissa, directed by her parents and lawyer, would not accept the prenup's legal force. My lawyers methodically refuted their assertions. They demonstrated that Melissa had separate legal counsel at the time of signing, that the agreement precisely stated our financial conditions as they were then, that the terms concerning future assets were clearly stated and comprehended, and that the shift in my financial circumstances stemmed from my endeavors and investments, not from any financial or business contribution by Melissa. The argument of gross injustice due to altered circumstances seldom prevails, merely because one party grew wealthy. The standard is quite stringent and typically means stopping the other party from having fundamental necessities provided, which was not the situation here considering Melissa's family's means. The court ultimately arranged hearings on the enforceability of the prenuptial agreement as an initial issue before dealing with property distribution or spousal support. It grew evident during these proceedings that Melissa's argument for voiding the agreement lacked strength. Her own previous declarations and the actions of her family insisting on the prenup years earlier went against her assertions of compulsion or injustice at the time of signing. My legal team offered a compelling argument for maintaining the agreement precisely as drafted. Anticipating probable loss in court regarding the prenup's validity, Melissa's legal team altered their approach somewhat, but still declined to settle based on the prenup's conditions. My attorneys counseled me to stay resolute. The prenup served as my protection, and, as it transpired, a highly effective one. The judge eventually decided on the enforceability of the prenuptial agreement. The decision was clearly in my favor. The court determined that the agreement was properly signed. Both parties had legal counsel or the chance for it. There was complete revelation of assets then, and the terms were not grossly unfair at the moment of signing. Significantly, the court declared that one party's later accumulation of wealth, particularly when clearly covered by the agreement's provisions concerning future assets, did not make the agreement unconscionable or void years afterward. The prenuptial agreement was fully maintained. This decision established the structure for the remainder of the divorce. Based on the upheld prenup, Melissa had given up most of her claims to my future acquired assets and substantial spousal support. Her legal team attempted to contend for some exemptions or basic support, but the agreement was highly limiting. The ultimate divorce order mirrored the conditions of the prenuptial agreement. Melissa got solely her pre-marriage assets, which were humble, the individual belongings she brought into the marriage or gained with her own distinct money, and a small short-term payment for temporary spousal support as detailed in the agreement, much less than she or her family had wanted. She obtained none of my business shares, none of my investments, and none of the rise in worth of my assets accumulated during the marriage. The riches I had created stayed mine, shielded by the paper her family had imposed on me. This result carried substantial repercussions for Melissa. As a wife at home for numerous years, she had not sustained a profession or built up independent, considerable income-generating capacity during the time of my financial expansion. She was used to a lavish way of life supported by my riches, but she had no right to that wealth following the divorce because of the prenup. The possessions she departed with were negligible. At the same time as the divorce proceedings concluded, or soon after, Melissa's relationship with the man she had the affair with also finished. From what I learned through others, he had no intention of ending his own marriage or incorporating her into his life past their affair. Once her divorce from me was finalized, and she didn't obtain a big financial settlement, her circumstances grew less attractive to him. He ceased communication. She remained without her affair partner, and without the financial stability she had expected from the divorce. Having no significant assets of her own and no earnings, she had few choices left. The big house she had been residing in with me was mine, and stayed mine. The way of life she had become used to had vanished. Her family, who had encouraged this entire situation and the challenge to the prenup, were rich, but their assets were also safeguarded. Though they could, and likely did, offer her a place to reside, she was basically beginning anew with very little of her own. The result of the divorce left her financially exactly where she was prior to marrying me, arguably worse off since she was older and had no recent work experience. The accounts I heard through shared contacts were that she went back into her childhood bedroom in her parents' big house. She possessed no independent resources, no employment, and her effort to depart the marriage for monetary gain and a different relationship had failed on both fronts. Regarding me, I possessed the wealth I had accumulated, the business, the assets. However, the marriage was concluded. The more than 10 years of my life spent with Melissa, the shared past, no matter how flawed it grew, had ended. The duration of the divorce, the legal conflicts, the encounter with her family, and the understanding of her deeds had been exhausting. The marriage finished. Melissa remained without funds compared to the lifestyle she had, residing back with her parents. I remained with the wealth I had built, alone. That is the order of events. From signing a prenup when I was broke, through building substantial wealth, meeting a challenge from the very people who pushed for the prenup, to having that accord upheld and the resulting fallout for everyone involved. It transpired, it is complete. No true emotion linked to penning this now, merely stating the facts of what occurred. Needed to record it somewhere. Here's another story that will leave you stunned. Okay, I need to share this somewhere. I'm a 53-year-old man, let's just call me Tom. Though I was 50 when my whole world turned completely upside down. I was married to Susan for 25 years. We have one daughter, Olivia. She was 24 when everything fell apart. We weren't wealthy, but we lived a comfortable life. I held a steady job in logistics management, and Susan worked part-time as a school administrator. We owned our home, a modest 3-bedroom place in a good neighborhood. Olivia was always the center of our lives, or at least mine. I truly believed we were close. She'd call me for guidance, and we'd often joke around. She was a good kid, earned a decent degree, and was working an entry-level position. About a year before things went wrong, she began talking about wanting to purchase her own place, either a small condo or a starter home. Prices were escalating rapidly, and she was finding it hard to save for a deposit. In hindsight, the signs with Susan likely began a couple of years before she departed. She grew more restless. She began making remarks about our friends who had larger houses or took cruises. She acquired a new group of friends from a yoga class she joined, women who appeared to have much more disposable income than we did. She began going out with them more often. Dinners, weekend trips I wasn't included in. When I inquired, she claimed I wouldn't enjoy it, saying it was just girl stuff. Her criticisms of me grew more frequent. It wasn't about major issues, but small digs. My clothes weren't stylish enough. I didn't pursue ambitious career goals. I was too satisfied with our quiet life. Our intimate life dwindled to almost nothing. She often appeared distant, preoccupied. She spent considerably more time on her phone, always turned away from me. If I entered the room, she'd rapidly switch screens or put it away. I confronted her several times, asking if there was another person. She'd deny it, become angry, and accuse me of being paranoid and jealous. She claimed she was merely trying to find herself, and wished I would support her personal growth. Around this period, Olivia also began behaving somewhat differently. She and Susan grew incredibly close, always whispering, exchanging glances I couldn't understand. Olivia confided in me less frequently. If I questioned her about anything being wrong with her mother, or between us, she'd simply state Mom was stressed from work, or that I was imagining things. She became Susan's firm defender. Discussions about Olivia's house deposit persisted. She was becoming despondent about ever being able to afford a place. Susan also kept raising the topic, suggesting we should assist more. I maintained a separate savings account, funds I'd carefully saved for years. It was a combination of inheritance from my parents and my own bonuses. It was my nest egg, the contingency fund, perhaps for retirement, or if one of us fell ill. It amounted to a substantial sum, nearly all my liquid savings apart from my regular pension contributions. After months of Olivia sounding stressed and Susan gently pressing me, I reached a decision. I informed Olivia I would give her the funds for a down payment. It was a substantial sum, almost $120,000, sufficient for a solid 20% on a small house she had located. She cried, embraced me, proclaiming I was the best dad ever. Susan also appeared pleased, stating it was the proper course of action. Olivia finalized the purchase of her house approximately 3 months before Susan delivered the shocking news. She moved in, and I assisted her with painting and assembling furniture. It felt gratifying, as though I had accomplished something meaningful for her future. It was a Tuesday evening. I returned home from work. Susan was seated at the kitchen table, not in her customary spot on the sofa, watching TV. She had a packed suitcase positioned by the door. She informed me very calmly that she was departing, that she had not been content for years, that she desired more from life. I inquired why, what exactly had occurred. She stated it was not one specific thing, but rather everything, that we had grown distant. Then she revealed there was another person, a man named Arthur. She claimed he was successful, kind, and capable of providing her with the life she merited. I inquired how long this had been transpiring. 6 months, she stated. Perhaps longer. I'm uncertain if she was being truthful even at that moment. She informed me Arthur was affluent. She was relocating to live with him, into his spacious house in a very affluent section of the city. I was utterly stunned. 25 years, simply gone. Then I inquired about Olivia. How were we planning to inform her? Susan averted her gaze. She stated, Olivia is aware. She has been aware for some time. That impacted me more profoundly than the affair. Olivia knew. My daughter. She knew her mother was betraying me. She knew Susan was going to abandon me. I couldn't comprehend it. Susan explained that Olivia had discovered by chance a few months earlier by noticing some texts on Susan's phone. Susan said Olivia had been initially distressed, but then she comprehended and desired her mother's happiness. A few months? I inquired. I calculated in my mind. That signified Olivia was aware of the infidelity, knew her mother was abandoning me when she received my $120,000, when she was weeping and embracing me, declaring me the best dad. She knew. She accepted my life savings, aware her mother was on the verge of ruining my life and her parents' marriage. I felt a chill. I requested Susan to verify this. Was Olivia aware when I provided her the funds for the house? Susan nodded with a touch of impatience, as if it were an unpleasant detail. She said Olivia didn't want to upset me before I handed over the cash, that the timing was just unfortunate. I just felt empty. I told Susan to depart. She grabbed her suitcase and left. Arthur was seemingly waiting in a car down the street. She didn't even glance back. I phoned Olivia right away. Her call went directly to voicemail. I dialed repeatedly. Nothing. I drove to her new home. Her car was present. I pressed the doorbell, pounded on the door. No response. I was certain I could hear movement inside. She was within, avoiding me. The subsequent few days are indistinct. I hardly slept or ate. The home felt vast and quiet. Friends telephoned. My brother called. I informed them Susan had departed. I didn't initially tell them about Olivia's part in it, or the funds. The betrayal from my own daughter felt like a more profound wound than Susan's. Susan I could almost comprehend on some level. People fall out of love, affairs occur. But Olivia, she was my child. Susan promptly filed for divorce. She desired nothing from the marital residence, only her personal possessions. Arthur was supporting her. It rendered the legal process straightforward, at least. The house was mainly in my name regardless, as I'd possessed it prior to our marriage, though years of shared finances would have made it complex had she pressed the issue. But she simply wished to be out, and cleanly. I eventually received a text message from Olivia, a brief, awkward message stating she regretted my pain, that everything was very challenging, and she hoped we could converse once things settled. No mention of the funds, no genuine apology for her deceit. I consulted an attorney, a friend of a friend. I inquired if there was any method to recover the funds from Olivia, considering the situation. He was direct. It constituted a gift. There was no contract, no loan understanding. Demonstrating fraudulent intent on her behalf concerning the gift would be extraordinarily challenging and costly, and probably without success. He mentioned I could attempt it, but it would protract for years and likely produce nothing but additional heartbreak and legal expenses. My life savings had vanished, and my daughter had contributed to this while aware my marriage was a deception on the verge of collapsing. I ceased attempting to reach Olivia after that message. What else was there to communicate? I began seeing a therapist for a few months. It offered some help, mostly just to vent to an impartial party. My brother proved a steadfast support, checking on me regularly, even though he resided a few states away. Approximately 3 years went by. The divorce was finalized within 8 months of Susan leaving. I sold our family house. Too many memories, too big for one person. I acquired a smaller townhouse in another area of town nearer to my job. I caught glimpses of Susan and Arthur's activities through informal channels. They traveled, attended lavish parties. Susan had the life she apparently craved. I never received direct communication from Olivia. I presumed she was living her life in the home I funded, likely benefiting from her mother's new affluent associations. I deliberately decided to try and construct a new life for myself. I concentrated on my career, earning a promotion. I wasn't happy, not in the way I was before, but I was functioning, stable again in a new, more solitary way. I prioritized becoming self-sufficient. I restored a segment of my savings, nowhere close to its former amount, but sufficient to avoid feeling entirely vulnerable. Then about 2 weeks ago, the past came knocking. Literally. I was at my residence on a Saturday morning when my doorbell sounded. I wasn't anticipating anyone. I observed my home on a Saturday morning as my doorbell sounded. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peered through the peephole and my heart nearly seized. It was Susan and Olivia, standing side by side on my doorstep. They both appeared different. I almost didn't open the door. A part of me wanted to simply walk away, feign absence. But another part, a colder, angrier one, was curious. Why now? After 3 years of silence. So I opened it. Susan began speaking immediately, a nervous torrent of words. Arthur had apparently encountered severe financial difficulties. His businesses were failing, and he had enormous debts. The large house was gone, the luxury cars repossessed. He had grown bitter and difficult. According to Susan, he had abruptly ended their relationship, essentially forcing her out with only her clothes. Olivia then interjected. She stated Susan had nowhere else to go, and had been residing with her for the past month in her small 2-bedroom house. But Olivia was also facing difficulties. She had lost her employment some months ago, and was only taking on freelance tasks occasionally. The payments for her house's mortgage were turning into a heavy load. She feared she would lose the property. That's when they revealed the purpose of their call. They required my assistance. Susan required somewhere to live, merely for a short period, until she could regain stability, and both of them were in need of funds. Olivia inquired if I might assist with her house payments, only for a couple of months. Susan even put forward the idea that perhaps, as my townhouse contained an extra bedroom, she could reside with me. She stated we shared such a long past, and certainly I wouldn't leave her homeless. Olivia supported her, claiming it was the honorable action. I heard everything they said without uttering a single sound, simply remained in the entryway, observing them. Their nerve was astonishing. Following their past actions, they stood before me, requesting my assistance, my funds, my dwelling. I have not provided them with a reply, as of yet. I informed them I required time to consider. They appeared disheartened, but stated they would contact me within a few days. They anticipate me coming to their rescue. Therefore, Reddit. What are your thoughts? This is not an IDA, as I have not acted on anything thus far. However, I am on the verge of doing so. I am quite certain I understand my next move, but I suppose I'm simply presenting everything here to clarify it in my mind before I deliver the decisive blow. This entire situation has brought forth a great deal. Update 1. To begin, my gratitude to everyone who reviewed my lengthy post and provided comments. I had not anticipated such a large number of replies. Many of you offered some harsh truths, and truthfully, it's what I needed to hear. Even though I was already leaning that way, it merely strengthened my resolve. Please, no DMs. I'm not seeking private conversations, I just wanted to vent on the Reddit. Numerous people asked for clarifications, so I'll try to address the primary ones. 1. The funds for Olivia's house. To be clear, the $120,000 was a gift. No loan agreement existed, no paperwork stating it was conditional. It constituted my entire life savings apart from my pension. I earned it over decades. A significant portion came as an inheritance from my own parents, who worked hard their whole lives. Giving it to Olivia meant I essentially reset my own financial safety net to zero at the age of 50. Yes, it was a foolishly trusting move in hindsight. 2. Olivia's awareness of the affair. Susan confirmed Olivia knew for about 8 months before Susan left me. Olivia discovered messages between Susan and Arthur. Susan stated Olivia was initially upset, but then accepted the idea because Susan convinced her she was miserable with me and Arthur would make her happy. Thus, for 4 months, Olivia knew her mother was actively involved in an affair and planning to leave. And during at least one of those months, she accepted my life savings with full knowledge. She sat in the lawyer's office with me for the house closing, smiling and thanking me, knowing all of this. That's the part that twists the knife. 3. Why did I not pursue legal action for the money? As I mentioned, my lawyer counseled against it. He stated that proving fraudulent misrepresentation or undue influence to the standard required to reclaim a gift would be a difficult, costly, and probably unwinnable struggle. He said it would appear as the resentment of a wronged husband and father, and courts are reluctant to reverse gifts unless there's solid evidence of direct, intentional deceit linked specifically to the purpose of the gift's transfer. My proof was mostly indirect, involving timing and Susan's confession about Olivia's knowledge. It would have been my testimony against Olivia's and Susan's, and they'd likely just claim Olivia knew but didn't tell me to protect my feelings, not to swindle me. He provided me with estimates for legal costs that would have consumed a significant portion of what I aimed to retrieve, with no assurance of victory. I decided not to invest further funds into that futile endeavor. 4. What kind of help did they ask for? Susan specifically requested to move into my extra bedroom. She stated it would be short-term, merely until she became stable. She also asked for money for daily costs. Olivia asked for assistance with her house payments for at least 6 months, and also for money for utilities and food supplies. They presented it as a unified stance, as if it were the most obvious course of action for me to intervene. 5. Regarding my current financial state, I'm stable. I'm not wealthy. After selling the family home, I paid off the previous mortgage and had sufficient funds for the down payment on my townhouse, and to save a little. I've been diligently saving for the last 3 years. I possess an emergency fund once more, and I'm adding more to my retirement. I'm not able to comfortably sustain 2 unemployed adults, nor would I be even if I were a millionaire. Reviewing the comments here and allowing their request to settle for a few more days truly reinforced what I already sensed. The terms nerve, presumption, and repercussions appeared frequently, and they struck a chord. For 3 years they conducted their lives, seemingly without any consideration for me. The man both of them betrayed, and in Olivia's situation, essentially took from. My daughter, whom I brought up, for whom I provided, to whom I gave my final significant financial holding, opted to side with her mother's deceit for her personal benefit, remaining silent to guarantee the housing funds, and then for her mother's supposed contentment. There was no regret in how they approached me, no apology concerning the past. It was entirely focused on their present requirements, their present difficulties. It was as though the preceding 3 years and their causes held no significance. They viewed me as a resource, a fallback they believed they could simply re-engage. My choice became quite evident. There would be no assistance, no funds, no accommodation, absolutely nothing. However, merely uttering no didn't seem sufficient. They needed to grasp the complete extent of their deeds, and why no was the sole feasible response. So when Susan and Olivia telephoned me on Wednesday evening, just as they had indicated, Olivia initiated the call with Susan likely by her side. Olivia inquired if I had taken time to think about their predicament. I informed her, yes, I had. I stated I would see them, but not at my residence. I got there a few minutes ahead of schedule yesterday afternoon. I selected a table in an unassuming spot. I did not place any order. They came in together, appearing hopeful. Susan even attempted a faint, optimistic grin. Olivia seemed anxious. They took their seats. Before they could begin their entreaties once more, I commenced. I maintained a steady and composed tone. I informed them I had heard their appeal several days earlier, and I had considered it thoroughly. I then presented my case. I recalled to Susan that she had opted to terminate our 25-year marriage for another individual, convinced he provided a superior existence. I declared that this was her decision, and decisions carry repercussions. Her repercussion was that when that new existence collapsed, she was left to fend for herself. Our union, our collaboration, our shared duties of assistance ceased when she exited that doorway with her luggage to join Arthur. I explained to her that her present difficult situation was a direct outcome of her own choices and Arthur's fiscal shortcomings, not my own. Subsequently, I addressed Olivia. I informed her that her treachery was, in numerous respects, more painful. I detailed how I had provided her with $120,000, my complete life savings, for her dwelling. Her betrayal was, in numerous respects, more painful. I reiterated how I had given her $120,000, my entire life savings, for her house. I stated, as a fact, that she had received these funds fully aware that her mother was involved in an affair and intended to depart from me. I informed her that she had kept her silence, permitted me to provide her with those funds, and engaged in the pretense of a content family, assisting her in realizing her aspiration, all the while understanding the ruin that was soon to overwhelm me. I recounted how she concealed herself in her new residence when I sought explanations. I brought up her lone, inadequate text message. I explained to Olivia that her conduct was not merely a passive oversight, it constituted an active fraud, that by accepting the money under those conditions, she had displayed a deep absence of integrity and faithfulness. I informed her that the dwelling she was so concerned about forfeiting was, fundamentally, financed by that deceit. I clarified to both of them that for 3 years they had exhibited no regard for my welfare, my monetary condition after my savings were exhausted, or my emotional state. They had not contacted me with apologies or efforts toward sincere reconciliation. Their re-emergence was exclusively a result of their personal requirements, their own despair. I then conveyed the essence of my reply. I informed them that I would not be providing them with any funds, not for Susan's daily costs, nor for Olivia's house payment. I informed Susan she would not be residing in my dwelling. I declared that my residence was my refuge, re-established after both of them had played a part in destroying my former one. I stated, the Bank of Tom is no longer operating. It was looted by its most trusted tellers, and it will not be reopening for you. Both of you are grown-ups. Susan, you made your bed with Arthur. It's regrettable that it collapsed, but it's not my duty to build you a new one. Olivia, you obtained your inheritance from me prematurely, under deceptive circumstances. That $120,000 was the extent of it. You need to handle your financial matters and your property on your own. If you cannot sustain the house, then you will have to make mature choices, such as selling it. I further informed them this would be our final conversation regarding this issue. I would not be deliberating it any further. I would not be accepting calls concerning it. I counseled them to seek assistance from social services, any other family members they possessed, or to secure employment, whatever it took. But they were not to turn to me once more. Susan began to weep, softly at first, then more visibly. She said I was acting cruelly, without compassion. She stated that she was desperate. She brought up all the years she invested in the marriage. I reminded her that she was the one who unilaterally decided. Those years meant less than a richer prospect. Olivia just stared at me, her face pale. She didn't say much, just mumbled something about me not understanding. I told her I understood perfectly. I understood that she had chosen to prioritize money and her mother's affair over her father. Susan then started to get angry, her voice rising. She accused me of wanting to see her suffer, of being vindictive. A couple of people at nearby tables glanced over. I kept my voice low. I told her I felt nothing about her suffering other than a distant observation that it was self-inflicted. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply stating my position and my boundaries. Vindication would be getting my money back, which wasn't happening. This was just consequences. They sat there for a few more minutes. Susan pleaded a bit more. Olivia looked defeated. I didn't engage further. I simply said, I believe I've made my position clear. There's nothing more to discuss. I then stood up, turned, and walked out. I didn't look back. Driving home, I didn't feel elation or joy. I felt a grim sense of closure, like a painful chapter had finally, truly ended. It was a hard thing to do, to look at your ex-wife and your only child and deliver that kind of message. But it was necessary. They had mistaken my previous kindness and generosity for weakness. They needed to understand that the man they knew, the one they undervalued and betrayed, was no longer available to them. I don't know what they will do, and frankly, it's not my worry anymore. They created this situation. They can determine how to manage it. Update 2. It's been around 9 months since my last update, the one where I described meeting Susan and Olivia and conveying my final decision. I believed enough time had passed, and enough, or little enough, depending on how you look at it, had happened that I could write a concluding chapter to this saga, for those who were following along. After that meeting in the coffee shop, I held my ground. I blocked both their numbers. I didn't reply to a couple of emails Olivia sent in the week following our meeting. They were mostly restating their pleas, with a little more self-pity included. For the first month or two, I was partly expecting them to appear at my doorstep again, or try to confront me at work. It didn't happen. I suppose my message was clear enough. I've heard some things indirectly, through a mutual acquaintance I still sometimes see, someone who knew Susan and me from years ago, and who Olivia apparently sought help from as well, without success. From what I understand, Susan's situation grew rather difficult. She apparently attempted staying with a couple of her wealthier friends, the ones she cultivated when she was with Arthur, but those arrangements were brief. It seems friendship based on proximity to wealth doesn't last when the wealth is gone. Last I heard, she was renting a room in a shared house in a much less desirable part of the city and working a retail job, a far cry from the life with Arthur, and even a step down from the life she had with me. The acquaintance mentioned Susan seemed bitter and continually complained about her misfortunes, rarely taking any responsibility for the choices that led her there. There was no mention of her trying to find more stable employment or upskill. As for Olivia, things also went the way one might expect. She wasn't able to keep up the mortgage payments on the house I funded. The acquaintance told me Olivia tried to get roommates, but it was problematic. She apparently struggled to find steady work that paid enough. The house, being a newer build, also came with property taxes and maintenance costs she hadn't fully factored in when giddy with a 100% funded down payment. About 4 months ago, so roughly 5 months after our coffee shop meeting, I saw that Olivia's house was listed for sale. It sold fairly quickly, but according to the acquaintance who seems to have a pipeline to this information, small world, I guess, or Olivia is still trying to tap old networks. After paying off the mortgage and selling costs, Olivia didn't clear a massive profit. House prices had stagnated a bit in her area, and she'd taken out a large mortgage on top of my gift. She apparently didn't walk away with a fortune, but enough to land somewhere, presumably. I don't know where she ended up living, perhaps with a friend or renting a small apartment. She is, to my knowledge, still estranged from any of my side of the family. Neither of them has made any further direct attempts to contact me. My life has continued on its new path. Work is fine, I'm financially stable, my health is good. So that's essentially it. They made their choices, they received their response, and life moved on. I did what I believed was right and necessary for my own sanity and self-respect. I don't wish them harm, specifically, but I also don't spend any time worrying about their well-being. They are adults who are accountable for their own lives, just as I am for mine. Thanks again to the Redditors who read and commented on my original posts. Getting it all out and gaining some external perspectives was helpful at the time. I don't anticipate any further updates on this particular front. It's done. Time to focus on what's ahead. Let's dive straight into the next disaster. I'm a 30-year-old man. My ex-girlfriend, Chloe, is 28. We dated for 5 years, and for 3 of those we shared an apartment, where I'm the main leaseholder. From my viewpoint, our relationship felt steady. We had routines, shared future plans, or so I believed. And while no relationship is totally free of small disagreements, I felt we were a strong pair. Our lives were quite integrated. We shared friend groups, holiday traditions with families, and the daily flow of a long-term partnership. This background is important for understanding what happened next and my current predicament. Things started to go wrong about 8 months ago. Chloe came to me one evening saying she felt personally confused and needed to find herself. She explained she felt she'd lost her personal identity inside the relationship and required space and time apart to discover who she was, apart from us as a couple. She suggested we take a break. I was, to say the least, shocked. This wasn't something I had expected. I asked for clarity on what a break would involve. Did it mean seeing other people? She was vague, saying she hadn't considered it that far, but mainly needed room to think, maybe staying with her sister or a friend for a bit. I proposed counseling, either for her individually or for us as a couple, but she rejected these suggestions, insisting it was something she had to handle herself. With hesitation, I agreed to this separation. I voiced my unease and my wish for distinct limits. We settled on a temporary split, with her taking some items to her sister's home. We also arranged to touch base weekly by phone, simply to keep some link. I repeated that for me, a break wasn't a free pass to date others, and she nodded, though her reply wasn't as solid an agreement as I would have preferred. The initial weeks were tough. I kept up my usual routine, went to work, saw my own friends, but the apartment felt vacant. Our weekly calls felt awkward. Chloe would provide unclear updates about thinking, writing in a journal, and being with her sister. I aimed to respect her stated requirement for space. Roughly a month into this break, a shared friend, Alex, reached out to me. Alex sounded uneasy, but believed I should know something. He had spotted Chloe at a bar in a nearby town, not with her sister, but with a man unfamiliar to me. Alex characterized their interaction as clearly intimate, like a date. I thanked Alex for the news. My first step was to try and confirm this without directly confronting Chloe, based on hearsay. I remembered Chloe mentioning a new work assignment that occasionally demanded late hours. The next week, during our planned call, I inquired about Chloe's week, and she mentioned being swamped with work and spending a quiet weekend with her sister. I specifically asked if she had gone out at all, perhaps to relax. She denied it, saying she was mostly staying home. This directly conflicted with what Alex had told me. The unease I had felt earlier now turned into firm suspicion. Over the next 2 weeks, I became more watchful. I didn't do anything extreme like following her, but I did pay closer attention to specifics. A friend of mine, separate from Alex, mentioned seeing Chloe's car parked regularly outside an apartment building in another part of the city, a complex where neither her sister nor any of her close friends lived. Another clue came from a shared online streaming service account. New programs, specifically ones Chloe and I had never watched or enjoyed, but that I knew a certain male coworker of hers named Ben was fond of, began showing up in the recently watched list. She told me Ben liked those shows. The buildup of these small bits of information created a clear image. I decided I needed to talk to Chloe about this directly. I set up a meeting with her, suggesting we speak in person at our apartment, as there were some practical issues about bills I wanted to discuss, which was accurate, but not my main reason. When she arrived, I was calm. I began by asking her plainly if she was seeing anyone else. Ask. She immediately denied it, looking offended that I would ask. She repeated that the break was about her personal journey. It was then that I presented the information I had. Alex's story, the detail about her car and the activity on the streaming account, linking that to Ben, whose public social media referenced those same shows. Chloe's mood changed. Her indignation disappeared, replaced by a string of hesitant explanations. At first, she tried to downplay the situation. She admitted she'd met Ben for coffee a few times, saying he was just a friend offering support during her confusing period. She claimed Alex must have misunderstood what he saw. As I calmly pointed out the contradictions, her story started to fall apart. Eventually, she confessed she had been seeing Ben. She admitted their relationship had turned physical soon after the break started. She tried to excuse her actions, saying she was lonely, confused, and that Ben had offered an escape and made her feel noticed in a way she claimed I hadn't in a long time. This naturally was painful, as these were feelings she had never directly told me before asking for a break. She insisted it wasn't planned and that she still cared for me. I listened to her explanations without speaking. When she finished, I told her that her actions, especially the long deception, were a basic breach of trust. I stated that no matter what she felt was missing in our relationship, the path she chose involved lying to me repeatedly. I informed her that I could not get past this betrayal and that our relationship was over. This was not a discussion or a negotiation. I was ending it. Chloe did not react well. There were tears, and she switched between apologizing and trying to shift blame, suggesting that if I had been more attentive, or if our relationship had been stronger, she would not have looked for validation elsewhere. I did not respond to these deflections. I repeated that her choices were her own, and the lying was the insurmountable problem. I asked her to arrange to move the rest of her belongings out of the apartment within the next 2 weeks. The following 2 weeks were strained. Chloe did come by, mostly when I was at work, to pack her things. There were a few times when we were both there, and she tried to re-engage, to make me change my mind, suggesting couples therapy now, a suggestion she had rejected when I first offered it. I stayed firm. I told her that therapy could not undo the deceit or the affair. She moved the last of her items out a day before the 2-week deadline. Her sister assisted her. I had a short, polite interaction with her sister, who seemed uncomfortable, but didn't say much. After Chloe left, I changed the locks the next day. In the weeks that followed, I prioritized my own welfare. I told my close friends and family about the breakup, giving a brief, truthful summary of what had occurred. Some of Chloe's friends, who had only heard her side of the break, first contacted me, showing confusion or even implying I was being too harsh. I calmly shared my perspective, and most grasped it. I blocked Chloe's number after a series of late-night calls, where she was emotional and at times accusatory. I also removed her as a friend and blocked her on social media platforms to establish needed distance for myself. Several months passed, likely around 5 or 6. I slowly got used to life without Chloe. I put time into my hobbies, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen often in the later part of my relationship, and concentrated on my career. I did not date. I was not ready. I learned through informal channels, particularly from Alex, who sometimes met mutual acquaintances, that Chloe was living with Ben. Their relationship appeared to be moving forward, at least on the surface. I accepted this and continued to build my own life. I felt I had managed a tough situation with honesty and was gradually recovering from the betrayal. About 3 weeks ago, the situation changed significantly. I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, and it was Chloe. Her voice was tense, and she seemed upset. This was the first direct contact I'd had with her in months. She started by apologizing profusely for everything that had occurred, for the pain she had inflicted. Her apology now sounded different, more desperate than her earlier efforts. She then explained her current situation. Ben had ended their relationship suddenly about a month before. Apparently the reasons weren't completely clear to her, but he had asked her to move out of his apartment, which she did. At the same time, her job situation had worsened. She worked in a role with some project-based parts, and a major project had concluded. Her employer had not extended her contract, citing economic factors, though Chloe suspected her breakup with Ben, who had some influence in her professional network, might have been a factor. She had been searching for a job for weeks without any luck. Consequently, Chloe was now practically without a home. She had been sleeping on a friend's couch for a couple of weeks, but that setup was coming to an end. She had used up all her savings. She told me she had contacted her sister, but her sister's living situation was complicated, with a new baby and limited space, and she could not provide more than extremely brief lodging for a night or two. Her parents, she mentioned, were unable to help much either, for various financial and health reasons. She then made her appeal. She asked if she could stay at my place, referring to my apartment. She said it would only be for a short time, just until she could regain her stability. She promised to find work, any work, and contribute, and that she would not be a burden. She stressed our 5-year history, our shared memories, and how I was the only one she felt she could approach who might understand or show compassion. She said she had made awful errors, but was now paying a heavy price and just needed a lifeline. When I seemed unsure, she also asked if I could at least loan her some funds to secure a room somewhere, or to cover her costs for a brief period. She was weeping for much of the call. I didn't give her an answer right away. I told her I had to think things over. Consequently, Chloe was now practically homeless. She had been sleeping on a friend's couch for a couple of weeks, but that setup was ending. She had used up all her savings. She told me she had contacted her sister, but her sister's living situation was complicated, with a new baby and limited space, and she could not provide more than very brief lodging for a night or two. Her parents, she mentioned, were unable to help much either, for various financial and health reasons. She then made her appeal. She asked if she could stay at my place, referring to my apartment. She said it would only be for a short time, just until she could regain her stability. She promised to find work, any work, and contribute, and that she would not be a burden. She stressed our 5-year history, our shared memories, and how I was the only one she felt she could approach who might understand or show compassion. She said she had made awful errors, but was now paying a heavy price and just needed a lifeline. When I seemed unsure, she also asked if I could at least loan her some funds to secure a room somewhere, or to cover her costs for a brief period. She was weeping for much of the call. I didn't give her an answer right away. I told her I had to think. Since that phone call, she has sent numerous lengthy text messages, repeating her request, detailing her difficulties, and appealing to my feelings of compassion. A shared acquaintance, someone more her friend than mine, who mentioned they had already provided assistance but couldn't continue, also reached out to me, explaining Chloe's desperate circumstances and suggesting that, considering our history, it would be a kind and proper act to offer some kind of aid. I feel a certain amount of internal struggle, not because I wish to reconcile. I absolutely do not. The trust is permanently shattered. Yet she is someone I spent 5 years of my life with, and the picture she painted of her current state is grim. Nevertheless, my view is that her present circumstances are the direct outcome of decisions she made, beginning with the choice to have an affair and conceal it. So, Reddit, would I be the asshole if I declined to let her move in, even for a short period, and declined to offer her any substantial financial support? I am thinking of telling her that while I recognize her challenging predicament, I am unable to assist her in the manners she is requesting, and that she needs to seek other resolutions. My justification is that I am not accountable for her current plight, and bringing her back into my life, even in a restricted way, would be harmful to my own well-being and the tranquility I have managed to establish since our separation. I also believe that providing substantial assistance might muddle limits I've diligently set, and could be misinterpreted as an invitation for more requests in the future. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who spent time reading my initial post and sharing their viewpoints. The number of replies was surprising, and I went through a large portion of them. The overall agreement, along with some quite direct private messages, was extremely useful in firming up my own ideas and settling the inner struggle I was feeling. Many people requested more information or made presumptions I wished to make clear. Regarding Chloe's reasons for the breakup, her declared motives were unclear, focused on self-discovery and a sense of being adrift. She never conveyed discontent with me or our connection explicitly prior to requesting the separation. It was portrayed as a personal quest she had to embark on by herself. I now believe this was probably a facade, or at least not the complete story, considering how rapidly she got together with Ben. Chloe's apologies. Prior to her present dire circumstances, her expressions of regret during the split were frequently paired with explanations or assigning blame, such as, "I'm sorry, but you were distant," or "I'm sorry, but Ben gave me attention I wasn't receiving." There was no clear, unambiguous apology for the deception and treachery until she ended up in severe difficulty. This timing strongly affected how I view her present displays of regret. I also believe that providing substantial assistance might muddle limits I've diligently set and could be misinterpreted as an invitation for more requests in the future. Update No. 1. Thank you to everyone who spent time reading my initial post and sharing their viewpoints. The number of replies was surprising, and I went through a large portion of them. The overall agreement, along with some quite direct private messages, was extremely useful in firming up my own ideas and settling the inner struggle I was feeling. Many people requested more information or made presumptions I wish to make clear. Regarding Chloe's reasons for the breakup, her declared motives were unclear, focused on self-discovery and a sense of being adrift. She never conveyed discontent with me or our connection explicitly prior to requesting the separation. It was portrayed as a personal quest she had to embark on by herself. I now believe this was probably a facade, or at least not the complete story, considering how rapidly she got together with Ben. Chloe's apologies. Prior to her present dire circumstances, her expressions of regret during the split were frequently paired with explanations or assigning blame, such as, "I'm sorry, but you were distant," or "I'm sorry, but Ben gave me attention I wasn't receiving." There was no clear, unambiguous apology for the deception and treachery until she ended up in severe difficulty. This timing strongly affected how I view her present displays of regret, the nature of her falsehoods. Besides lying about the affair itself, she also misled her sister and some mutual friends concerning the conditions of our separation, portraying herself as a casualty of a relationship that was constraining her, and me as someone who failed to grasp her needs. This caused some uncomfortable social interactions for me at first, until the reality became apparent to those friends. Reviewing the comments strengthened my original sentiments. The repeated point was that Chloe's present predicament, though regrettable, was a direct outcome of several choices she made. Many commentators noted that letting her return to my residence, even briefly, would not only disturb my tranquility, but would also probably be a short-term solution for her, failing to tackle the fundamental problems that brought her to this point. It would also foster an unhealthy interaction and possibly invite more manipulation or emotional anguish for me. The expression, "she made her bed, now she must lie in it," showed up repeatedly, and though severe, it struck a chord with the essence of the matter concerning individual accountability. My main worry remained safeguarding my own mental and emotional health. I put an effort to overcome the betrayal, and bringing her back into my everyday existence, in any form, felt like a considerable regression. I also contemplated the chance that if I aided her significantly now, she might perceive it as an indication that reconciliation was not entirely out of the question, which it absolutely is. Several days following my initial post, after considering the feedback and my own reflections, I settled on my plan of action. Chloe had kept sending text messages, each more desperate than the last. She recounted her unsuccessful efforts to secure lodging with other friends or distant family, and her quickly diminishing money. I resolved to speak with her one final time, clearly and without ambiguity. I opted to do this through a recorded phone conversation because I wished to guarantee there were no misunderstandings. But I also understood I had to keep it short and direct to prevent being pulled into a long, emotional argument. I called her. When she picked up, she sounded instantly hopeful, which made what I needed to say harder, but essential. I informed her that I had given her plea careful consideration. I recognized that she was in a truly challenging situation, and that on a human level, I regretted she was enduring such difficulty. Then I plainly stated that I could not provide her a place to live in my apartment under any conditions. I clarified that our romantic connection was finished, the trust had vanished, and bringing her back into my home would be detrimental to my own well-being. I also informed her that I was not able to offer substantial financial aid. I clarified that I believed her present circumstances stemmed from decisions she had made, and while I empathized with her predicament, I was not accountable for resolving it on her behalf. I recommended she keep looking into any available social services, assistance groups, or any relatives she hadn't contacted yet. I did offer one very minor detached gesture. I told her I was prepared to send her a gift card for a grocery store for a small sum, sufficient for a few days' worth of groceries, as a single act of kindness, without any conditions and no anticipation of it leading to more aid. I told her this was the ultimate extent of what I was prepared or able to do. Chloe remained quiet for an extended moment once I had finished speaking. Then she started to cry. It was not the insincere crying I believed I'd heard previously, but it sounded like true despondency, which was difficult to listen to. She asked, "So that's all? After 5 years, you're simply going to discard me when I have nothing and no one?" I repeated, as kindly yet resolutely as I could, that I was not discarding her, but instead safeguarding my own life and personal limits after her choices had brought our relationship to an end. I told her that the 5 years we had together were also compromised by her deeds. She then grew angry. She charged me with being cold, uncaring, and unforgiving. She said she had hoped I was a better man than that. She mentioned particular occasions from our history where we had mutually supported one another, attempting to use them as an advantage. I did not get into a debate about the past. I simply declared that my decision was conclusive. The conversation concluded with her abruptly ending the call. A few minutes later, I received a flurry of text messages filled with anger, accusations, and guilt-tripping. I read the first few and then decided not to read any more. I did not reply to them. As per my offer, I did purchase an e-gift card for a local supermarket chain and texted her the code and PIN with a simple message. "As discussed, I wish you the best in finding a solution." She did not acknowledge receipt of the gift card code via text. I noticed a few days later, through the gift card's balance check feature online, that it had been fully redeemed. I also notified the mutual acquaintance who had previously contacted me on Chloe's behalf of my decision and my reasons, asking them to respect my position and not act as a go-between moving forward. This acquaintance voiced disappointment, but said they understood. In the immediate aftermath of that final conversation, I felt a mixture of things. There was a feeling of sadness that a 5-year relationship had ended in such a painful way for both of us, even though she was largely responsible for its demise. But overriding that was a feeling of relief that I had stood firm and protected my boundaries. The situation was upsetting, but I knew I had made the right decision for myself. Update 2. Roughly 9 months have passed since my last update, and a little over a year since I made the initial post seeking advice on how to handle my ex-girlfriend Chloe's pleas for help. Quite a bit of time has passed, and the circumstances have, in some ways, found their own resolution, albeit not a pleasant one for Chloe. Following my final communication with Chloe, where I offered the grocery gift card and then blocked her number, I had no direct contact with her for several months. I focused on my own life, kept working, and maintained the boundaries I had set. News about Chloe reached me infrequently through a few different people. The mutual acquaintance who had initially advocated for her eventually stopped communicating with me about Chloe, respecting my wishes. However, another old friend, who is more connected to Chloe's wider social circle, occasionally shared updates, not to solicit help from me, but rather as an observation of the unfolding situation. From what I gathered, Chloe's situation did not improve quickly. She apparently stayed with a series of different acquaintances for very short periods, never managing to secure stable housing. The job market remained tough for her, or perhaps her lack of a stable address, and the stress of her situation made job hunting more challenging. There were mentions of her attempting to get assistance from various social programs, with limited or slow success. Roughly 4 months after my last update, so about 7 months after the initial post, I learned that Chloe had managed to secure a room to rent in a shared house in a more affordable part of a nearby city. She had also seemingly found some part-time, irregular work in the service industry. It was a far cry from her previous career, and the pay was minimal, but it was something. For a period, I heard nothing further and presumed she was perhaps gradually rebuilding. However, approximately 2 months ago, so about 7 months into her newfound stability, I received an unforeseen email from Chloe's sister. I had not spoken to her sister since the day she assisted Chloe in moving her belongings out of my apartment. Her sister's email was concise and direct. She informed me that Chloe had lost her part-time job because of unreliability, and consequently had been evicted from her rented room since she could no longer afford the rent. As per her sister, Chloe had then depleted all her temporary housing options with friends. Her sister wrote that Chloe had been struggling considerably with her mental health, was profoundly depressed, and had been rejecting any suggestions to seek professional help or connect with more substantial support services. The sister mentioned that Chloe had briefly resided with her and her husband again, but Chloe's unstable emotional state and lack of effort to improve her circumstances had placed an immense strain on their household, particularly with a new baby. They ultimately asked Chloe to leave after a particularly challenging incident, the specifics of which her sister did not disclose. Her sister wasn't directly asking me for anything. She mentioned she believed I had a right to be aware, considering our shared past, and also because Chloe had seemingly been bringing up my name once more, openly wondering if I would assist her if she genuinely apologized sufficiently. Her sister wished to make it evident she was not supporting this and had reached her breaking point. She concluded the email by stating Chloe was, to her knowledge, currently residing in a women's shelter in her city, and that the family was deeply concerned, but felt unable to alter Chloe's path unless Chloe herself assumed some accountability. I responded to her sister, conveying my sympathies for the family's difficult situation and for Chloe's struggles, but I reaffirmed that my position from a year prior had not altered. I mentioned that, although the news was disheartening, I was not able to intervene or provide assistance to Chloe, as this would ultimately not be beneficial for either of us. Her sister responded, stating she comprehended and thanked me for my candor. I have not received any further communication since that interaction 2 months ago. Chloe has not tried to reach out to me directly, probably because she lacks any current easy way to do so, or perhaps she has at last accepted my earlier decision. Her life has evidently followed a very challenging path since her decisions resulted in the end of our relationship and her later breakup with Ben. The downfall I mentioned in my original post appears to have been profound and lengthy. As for me, the past year has involved ongoing healing and progress. I have upheld my boundaries. My life is steady. I have managed to put the whole painful experience behind me, though learning about her continuing difficulties does bring forth a distant feeling of sorrow for the person she once was, or who I believed her to be. Yet it does not alter my determination. This will probably be my last update on this subject. The matter with Chloe, from my viewpoint, is concluded. Her decisions guided her down a path, and while it is a harsh one, it is a path I'm not accountable for, nor can I change. I remained steadfast in my choice not to become involved in the repercussions of her actions, and I do not regret that choice. It was essential for my own well-being. It was essential for my own well-being. My thanks to the Reddit community for the initial counsel and for offering a space to express the situation. It was truly beneficial during a challenging period. I hope Chloe ultimately finds the assistance she requires and decides to reconstruct her life, but that journey is hers and hers alone to undertake. Time for another story you won't believe. Hi everyone, I'm using a throwaway account for clear reasons. My name isn't truly Mark, but it will serve for this. I am 35 years old. My wife, whom I'll refer to as Sarah, is 33. We have been wed for 10 years and together for 12. We have 2 children, a daughter, Lily, aged 8, and a son, Tom, aged 6. I am writing this, I believe, to try and bring some order to the chaos that has broken out in my life over the past 48 hours. Perhaps sharing it with strangers will offer some clarity, or at least a sounding board. My career for the past 12 years has been as a senior project manager with a major commercial construction firm. The projects are intricate, high value, and consistently operate under tight deadlines. This means long hours. A usual day is 10 to 12 hours at the site or office, and it's not unusual for that to stretch to 14 or 15 hours. When we are striving for a phase completion or handling sudden crises, which are common in this line of work. Weekend work, at least a Saturday morning, is more often the norm than the exception. It's a demanding career, without a doubt, but it's one that has enabled us to live comfortably, acquire a nice home in a good school district, and grant Sarah the chance to not be financially burdened by the need to work. Before we had children, Sarah was employed as a freelance graphic designer. She was gifted and had a modest client base. When Lily arrived, we had numerous discussions about childcare and careers. Sarah shared a keen wish to be a stay-at-home mom, at least during the kids' early years. I backed this decision. My earnings were ample, and we both agreed that having one parent regularly present was advantageous. She formally ceased accepting new clients roughly 6 months after Lily's birth, and has since viewed herself mainly as a homemaker, though she would sometimes undertake small design tasks for friends or local community groups, more as a pastime than for earnings. Our early family life was, I thought, rather stable. I managed my challenging work schedule, and she oversaw the household and the kids' daily routines. When I was at home, I aimed to be present, handling bath times, bedtime stories, and weekend activities when work didn't intrude. The change started subtly about 8 or 9 months ago. Sarah began discussing her desire for more of a social life, feeling somewhat isolated. Her friend Jessica, whom she's known since college, began arranging girls' nights out. At first, it was once a month, perhaps dinner or a film. I was entirely supportive. I believed it was good for her. I would assume full child care responsibilities on those evenings. Gradually, the frequency grew. Once a month turned into every other Friday. Then for the past 3 months, it became nearly every Friday, and occasionally a Saturday afternoon or evening, too. The makeup of the group also appeared to change. Jessica was mentioned less, and new names I didn't know began to surface. Her conduct at home also started to shift, though it was like a slow tide, simple to overlook day to day. She became more absorbed in her phone, frequently smiling or typing quick responses, but if I asked, the answers were vague. Just a funny group chat item or organizing the next outing. She started to put more effort into her look for these nights out, new attire, more time spent on hair and makeup. Again, I rationalized this as her enjoying her social life. The initial clear warning sign, though minor, was about 2 months ago when she set a new, intricate password on her phone. We had never used passwords unknown to the other, not from a habit of checking up on each other, but simply for ease and transparency. When I inquired about it, she dismissed it, saying her phone software updated and prompted her to use a stronger lock. It felt a bit odd, but I didn't press it. Then, roughly 3 weeks ago, I was balancing our joint account for some work-related expense claims. I noticed a series of charges at a cocktail bar named Crimson Lounge, fake name, a spot I'd never heard her mention, and certainly not the type of place her old friend Jessica would visit. There were 4 such charges over a 6-week span, always on a Friday or Saturday night. Alongside these were Uber receipts for rides to and from an address in a fashionable yet somewhat distant part of the city, an area she had no other believable reason to go to, especially late in the evening. The sums weren't large, but the pattern differed from her usual spending. I made a mental note, a mounting feeling of discomfort beginning to take shape. But I was in the middle of a vital project deadline, working almost constantly, and I guess I delayed the immediate confrontation. The situation peaked 2 nights ago. It was a Friday. Sarah had gone out for another girls' night. She got home around 3 a.m. I was in bed, pretending to sleep, but I was fully awake. Work stress was a factor, but the main reason was this nagging worry that had been growing for weeks. She was clearly tipsy, humming to herself as she prepared for bed. She placed her phone on her nightstand, screen facing up. A few moments later, it vibrated with a notification. I looked over. The screen was lit, and a message preview was visible. It was from a contact called David H., and the visible text read, "Tonight was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." I didn't yell. I didn't even lift my voice. I just lay there for a moment, the words searing into my mind. Then I asked, quite calmly, "Sarah, who is David H.?" She physically flinched, startled. She turned to look at me, her face instantly losing all color. Her first response was denial. She stammered, "David? Oh, he's just a friend of Stephanie's from the group. He sometimes joins us." I replied just as calmly, "I saw the message, Sarah. Tonight was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." That doesn't sound like a casual acquaintance from a group outing. That's when her composure broke. She sat on the edge of the bed, facing away from me, and began to cry. The admission emerged in fractured bits, a flood of tears, apologies, and excuses. She had been having an affair with this man, David, for the past 4 months. He was someone she encountered at the Crimson Lounge during one of her nights out, a night when, apparently, her girlfriends were absent. Some of those subsequent girls' nights had been solely with him. She spoke of feeling isolated due to my extended work hours, of feeling unnoticed and unvalued. She claimed David gave her attention, made her feel vital and spirited once more. She reiterated endlessly that it was a terrible error, that she loved me, that she didn't wish to ruin our family, our life together. I listened mostly in quiet. Our children were sleeping soundly in their rooms, entirely oblivious that their world was breaking apart. I didn't touch her. I didn't say much beyond asking a few clarifying questions about the chronology. Yesterday morning, after a completely sleepless night spent in separate rooms, I moved to the guest room, and the apologies persisted. She looked dreadful, her eyes red and puffy. She kept saying she would do anything to fix it, and then, amidst this apparent remorse, she put forward her solution. She asked, her voice shaking but with a hint of desperate hope, if we could consider an open marriage. She contended that her feelings for David were genuine and important, but that she also loved me and wanted to keep our family whole. An open marriage, she suggested, would enable her to continue her relationship with David openly, and I would be free to seek other connections too if I wished. She presented it as a modern, mature way to manage a complex emotional situation, a method to avoid the damaging path of divorce. I was stunned. It felt as though she was asking for my consent to carry on her affair, to legitimize it, to somehow integrate this other man into the structure of our lives. I told her I needed time. I couldn't give her an answer. So here I am now in my small home office, the door shut. Lily and Tom are watching Saturday morning cartoons downstairs. Sarah is moving around in the kitchen, her presence a constant, burdensome weight. She's attempting to act normal for the children, but it's a very fragile disguise. My mind is spinning. What are the repercussions? How do I even begin to tackle this? My immediate gut reaction to the open marriage concept is disgust, but I am also trying to think tactically. What if refusing outright causes her to leave at once? What about the children? My main concern must be their steadiness and welfare. I work grueling hours. How would I cope as a single father? The idea is daunting. Has anyone ever faced such a situation? An affair followed not merely by a confession, but by a plea to incorporate the affair partner into the marriage framework? What are the initial actions I should take? Update 1. It has been 3 weeks since I posted my original situation here. The flood of comments, counsel, and private messages was immense, and I wish to convey my genuine thanks. Reading through so many varied viewpoints, some harsh, some compassionate, some starkly practical, helped me penetrate the initial haze of shock and hurt. It made me understand that while my specific circumstances felt singular and isolating, the core themes of betrayal and tough decisions are regrettably widespread. Several repeated questions and requests for clarification arose, so I'll address those. To begin with, many asked if there were prior signs of unhappiness from Sarah, or if we'd looked into therapy before then. In retrospect, her increased desire for girls' nights and some general comments about feeling trapped in a rut could be viewed as signs. Nonetheless, she never communicated deep dissatisfaction or loneliness to me directly in a way that suggested our marriage was in serious trouble. Whenever I asked if everything was okay or if she wanted to talk, she'd usually say she was just tired or stressed because of the kids. We had not considered therapy. I genuinely believed, perhaps rather naively, that we had a fundamentally strong, though sometimes stressed, marriage. Her apology, like I said, was full of tears and self-blame, but its nearness to the open marriage proposal, in hindsight, tainted its sincerity for me. It started to feel less like genuine remorse for the betrayal and more like regret for being caught, followed by a swift pivot to her desired outcome, keeping her affair partner without losing the stability of her marriage and family. She characterized her feelings for David as something that had caught her by surprise, and that she felt terribly conflicted, believing an open arrangement was the only path that didn't involve shattering everyone's lives. The advice that came up most often, and the one that aligned most closely with my need for definite action, was to consult with a lawyer. I set up a meeting within 2 days of my initial post. I located a reputable family law attorney through a bar association referral. That 1-hour consultation was perhaps the most clarifying and empowering hour I'd experienced in months. The lawyer was straightforward, professional, and outlined the legal landscape concerning divorce, custody, and financial settlements in our state. She advised me, regardless of any reconciliation attempts, to start meticulously documenting everything: Sarah's behavior, my involvement with the children, financial outlays, and any communication about her affair or the open marriage proposal. She explained that such documentation could be crucial in safeguarding my interests and, importantly, the children's interests, if divorce became the way ahead. She also discussed the potential ramifications of an open marriage agreement on divorce proceedings, noting it might complicate matters, but that evidence of pre-existing infidelity and present conduct would still be highly pertinent. Following that meeting, and after days spent rereading comments here and considering the wreckage of my marriage, I reached a difficult decision. The idea of an open marriage, especially one started by infidelity and so clearly favoring Sarah, was something I could not truly accept. Nonetheless, an immediate aggressive confrontation or outright rejection of her proposal also felt risky. I worried she might become more secretive, or that it could prompt a hasty choice from her that would adversely affect the children before I was ready. So I devised a plan, a strategy that my lawyer recognized as a sensible, though emotionally draining, approach for the immediate future. 1, I told Sarah I was prepared to consider her open marriage proposal. I selected my words with care. I didn't state I consented. I conveyed that it was a drastic idea, that I was still coming to terms with the affair, and that if we were to even start to look into such a course, it would demand tremendous effort, expert guidance, and complete openness from her. I informed her I'd need time to reflect, to investigate, and to see if I could even contemplate such a notion. I proposed that a precondition would be for her to tell me everything about David, their relationship, and her expectations. I also brought up the idea of us seeking couples counseling specifically to manage this, fully aware this was a stalling strategy on my end. The main objective here wasn't to save the marriage through this method, but to gain myself time, to stop her from becoming entrenched or attempting to conceal her actions more, and to let me start my own preparations. 2. Following my lawyer's firm advice, I engaged a licensed and respected private investigation company. This was an important move, and not one I made without careful thought, but I recognized its importance. Their assignment was to discreetly record Sarah's activities, specifically her encounters and communications with David, the time she spent away from home, especially when she was meant to be looking after the children, and any general behavior that could be interpreted as neglecting her parental duties or misusing marital funds. They commenced their work around 2 weeks ago. The expense is substantial, but I see it as an investment in ensuring a just result for myself and my children. 3. I've grown exceptionally meticulous about documentation. I initiated a secure digital journal, password protected and backed up. Within it, I record daily entries, Sarah's arrivals and departures, the justification she provides, her degree of involvement with the children, her moods, any important discussions, paraphrased as precisely as possible, and copies of texts or emails pertaining to her affair or arrangements with David. At the same time, I've made significant, noticeable alterations to my own schedule to take on the role of primary caregiver. This proved to be the most challenging aspect logistically. I held several candid discussions with my direct supervisor in the HR department, clarifying that I was handling a serious family issue that necessitated more predictable hours and reduced travel for the foreseeable future. I didn't reveal the precise details of the affair, but stressed the importance of being the consistent parent for my children. They were remarkably understanding and have granted me some flexibility, which means I work intensely focused hours while at work and then carry on remotely late into the night after the children are asleep. I now manage all morning routines for Lily and Tom. Breakfast, preparing them, and the school run. I pick them up from school or after-school activities. I attend every school meeting and every doctor's appointment. I cook their dinners, assist with homework, and oversee their bedtime routines. This change isn't just for legal advantage. My children are my foremost priority, and they need consistency and an attentive parent more than ever. 4. Following my lawyer's advice, I've also taken measures to fully grasp and safeguard our financial situation. I've collected copies of all bank statements, investment records, credit card bills, tax returns, and property deeds for the past 5 years. I sought advice from a financial advisor on my own to comprehend my personal financial position and to prepare for possible future situations. I opened a separate bank account in my own name for my future salary deposits, though I still contribute to shared household expenses from our current joint account, keeping a close eye on it for any unusual withdrawals. By Sarah. Sarah's response to my declaration that I would consider her proposal was one of relief. It was as if a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She truly appears to think that I am receptive to this concept in our lives. Consequently, she has grown surprisingly candid about her continuing relationship with David. She'll casually bring up, "Oh, David and I intend to visit that new XYZ place on Friday," or "David had a truly demanding day at his office." Hearing his name, uttered so openly in our home, serves as a continuous, unsettling reminder of the circumstances. It requires a considerable degree of self-restraint to keep a neutral look. She has made no meaningful steps toward the openness or trust building I cited as prerequisites. Her interpretation of transparency is merely telling me about her arrangements with him, seemingly anticipating my consent. The private investigator has already furnished several updates. They are experts and have maintained discretion. Their preliminary reports corroborate regular meetings between Sarah and David, both during daylight hours when she is supposedly running errands. They possess photographic proof of them together at eateries, parks, and entering and exiting a particular apartment building, which they presume to be David's dwelling. More troubling, they have recorded 2 occasions in the last week where Sarah assigned childcare to a quickly arranged babysitter, once for Tom's after-school soccer practice pickup, and once for an evening when she informed me she was going for an errand, while she was seen meeting David. These occurrences are being painstakingly documented. My increased involvement with Lily and Tom has been the one truly positive outcome in this situation. They have responded well to the consistency and my focused attention. Lily, who is rather observant, has remarked on a few occasions, "Mommy goes out quite a bit now, and you collect us from school constantly, Daddy. I enjoy that." I've kept my replies imprecise and comforting, refraining from any critical remarks about Sarah. In reality, it's draining. I am effectively operating as a full-time single parent while managing a demanding job and the enormous emotional burden of this deceptive life. Rest is a privilege. The mood inside our home is profoundly surreal. We are housemates who share children and a past. Sarah is frequently upbeat, nearly joyful, seemingly relieved now that her secret is known, and she thinks a way has been opened for her to get what she desires. She engages in casual conversation about groceries or school announcements. There are no significant discussions about our marriage, our history, or our future, apart from her infrequent hopeful comments about how individuals make all kinds of arrangements succeed nowadays. My attorney is pleased with our current direction and the caliber of information we're collecting. He emphasized that showing a consistent pattern of me being the primary caregiver, combined with proof of Sarah's continuing affair and any related neglect or financial misconduct, will greatly bolster my standing if this goes to a contested divorce, especially regarding child custody and spousal support claims. I don't know how long I can keep up this tightrope walk. Each day is a performance, but for the time being, this is the plan. The goal is clear: to safeguard my children, secure their future, and ensure that if our marriage must conclude, it does so on terms that are fair and truly reflect Sarah's choices, not her idealized vision of an open life constructed on my silent suffering. Thank you again for the opportunity to write this. I expect a long journey ahead and will provide another update when there are significant developments. Update 2, final update. It's been 14 months since my initial post, which seems like a lifetime ago, and roughly 13 months since I gave my first update. The journey since then has been fraught with challenges, but it has come to its legal conclusion, and I feel it's fitting to share the final results, both for my own sense of closure and for those who dedicated their time and thoughts to my circumstances. The 3 months following my last update were perhaps the most challenging phase of this entire ordeal. I continued the charade of considering Sarah's open marriage proposal while living under the same roof. The PI's work continued, yielding a comprehensive portfolio of Sarah's activities. Her involvement with David didn't just continue, it intensified. She became bolder, often staying out late on weeknights, citing various social engagements or freelance work that the PI's reports consistently revealed were rendezvous with David. There were documented weekend afternoons spent at his apartment, and even a 2-day wellness retreat she claimed to be attending with a girlfriend, which the PI confirmed was a trip taken with David to a nearby resort town. During this period, my role as the de facto sole functioning parent for Lily and Tom became increasingly evident. I managed every aspect of their lives: school schedules, homework, meals, doctor visits, playdates, and emotional support. Sarah's engagement with them dwindled to perfunctory interactions. She was often distracted, on her phone, or simply absent. For instance, Lily had a leading role in her school play, an event we had marked on the calendar for months. 2 days before, Sarah announced she had an unavoidable work commitment that evening. The PI later confirmed she was having dinner with David. I noted her absence along with Lily's quiet disappointment. There were many such instances, each one a painful piece of evidence, not just for legal purposes, but of her growing detachment from her family. The emotional toll on me was immense, maintaining a calm, composed exterior for the children and a neutral, considering facade for Sarah, while internally processing the daily reports from the PI and managing my own grief and anger was draining. Sleep was scarce, and stress was a constant companion. The decision to file for divorce was made in consultation with my lawyer after nearly 5 months of this. We had a substantial body of evidence: detailed timelines, photographic and video evidence from the PI, financial records showing her spending on David, including cash withdrawals before her outings and charges for gifts and meals I could link to their meetings, and my own exhaustive log of her parental absenteeism versus my full-time caregiving. My lawyer was confident we had a very strong case, not just for divorce on grounds of adultery, but for securing primary custody and arguing against significant spousal support due to her conduct. The logistics of filing were carefully planned. I secured a new lease on a house in the same school district to minimize disruption for Lily and Tom. The day I filed, while Sarah was out, supposedly at a yoga workshop, which the PI confirmed was actually an afternoon at David's, I moved the children and our essential belongings to the new residence. Sarah was served divorce papers and a motion for temporary primary custody that evening upon her return to a nearly empty house. Her reaction, as conveyed to me later via legal channels, since I had put in place a strict no direct contact policy, with all communication handled by lawyers or a court-mandated co-parenting app for child-related matters only, was utter shock, then intense anger and accusations of betrayal. She had truly believed I was slowly accepting her vision of an open marriage. The discovery that my apparent consideration had been a calculated tactic to gather evidence against her was, by all accounts, a crushing blow to her narrative. The divorce proceedings were disputed, though not as prolonged as they might have been, thanks to the overwhelming amount of our evidence. Sarah, through her legal counsel, initially resisted strongly. She sought joint physical and legal custody, substantial spousal support, citing her years as a stay-at-home mother, and a greater portion of the marital assets. Her lawyer attempted to discredit the PI's evidence as an invasion of privacy, and portrayed me as vengeful. We had multiple hearings before a judge. My lawyer laid out our case. The PI's testimony, backed by his thorough reports and visual proof, proved convincing and undeniable. My daily records, compared against school attendance records, doctor's visit confirmations, all indicating me as the present parent, and receipts for the children's costs, formed a clear image of primary caregiving. We showed not only the affair, but a steady pattern of Sarah placing her relationship with David first, above the needs and welfare of Lily and Tom. The proof of her using marital money on David, though not enormous, additionally backed our assertions. There were strained moments, particularly during cross-examinations, but the facts were undeniable. Sarah's efforts to explain her absences or reinterpret her relationship with David were unsuccessful against the documented truth. Mediation was tried, but swiftly failed, since Sarah was reluctant to budge much from her initial requests. The judge's ultimate decision, issued roughly 2 to 3 months ago following a final hearing, was extensive. 1. I received sole legal custody, ultimate decision-making power, and primary physical custody of Lily and Tom. The judge's summary clearly highlighted the vast evidence showing my role as the steady and reliable primary caregiver for an extended period, pitting it against Sarah's proven poor judgment and her preference for her own personal interests above the essential needs of her children. 2. Sarah was granted a step-up visitation schedule. Initially, this involved alternate weekends from Friday evening to Sunday evening, and a single 4-hour midweek evening visit, which was to be professionally supervised at her cost for the first 3 months. The supervision was required due to the judge's expressed worries regarding her recent pattern of disengagement and the necessity to guarantee a child-focused setting during her time with the children. After 3 months of compliant supervised visits, the supervision was removed. All exchanges of the children were to take place at a neutral public spot or be managed by a mutually agreed upon third party to reduce direct contact between Sarah and me. 3. Sarah had asked for spousal support equal to 40% of my net income for a duration of 10 years. Her lawyer contended this was warranted by her lengthy absence from the workforce to raise children. My lawyer responded by offering proof of her graphic design abilities, though seldom used, her comparatively young age and capacity for employment, the brief period she had been a full-time SOM before her focus notably changed, and, crucially, her behavior. The judge granted Sarah transitional alimony for a term of only 18 months, at an amount considerably less than requested, approximately 15% of what she had sought. The judge noted that while her time as a homemaker was a factor, her neglect of parental duties and the circumstances of the marital breakdown, including the financial improprieties related to the affair, directly affected how long the award would last. He basically concluded that she had weakened her own claim through her actions. 4. The marital assets were mostly split according to state guidelines, but the judge did make an adjustment in my favor to reflect the marital funds Sarah had provably spent on her relationship with David. Trips, expensive dinners, gifts. This wasn't a huge sum overall, but it was a recognition of the financial effect of her affair. The marital home was ordered to be sold, and the equity divided after these adjustments. I used my share to put a down payment on my current house and create a secure financial foundation for myself and the children. From what I understand via the co-parenting app, which is solely for practical matters, and occasionally from neutral third-party contacts, Sarah moved in with David soon after the divorce concluded, and she needed to leave the sold marital home. They live in an apartment. Her financial reality is reportedly very different from what she had grown used to. The transitional alimony is minimal, and David's income, combined with any sporadic freelance work Sarah might be doing, appears insufficient to maintain anything near her former lifestyle. The initial romance and excitement of their relationship is now, by some accounts, dealing with the routine pressures of cohabitation, financial limits, and the consequences of her choices regarding the children. Her visitation with Lily and Tom is in line with the court order. The exchanges during handovers, which I now have my sister or a trusted friend manage to avoid direct contact, are described as polite, but strained. The children are civil with her, but their main bond and sense of security are clearly with me. Life for Lily, Tom, and me has settled into a new, steady normal. The house, though smaller than our former house, has become a warm and happy home. My work situation has evolved. I leverage the crisis to negotiate a role with more manageable hours and much less travel, letting me be a truly present father. It meant a small reduction in pay and perhaps a slower career path, but the compromise for my children's well-being is one I'd always make. They are flourishing. They are doing well in school, have a good group of friends, and while the divorce was certainly a difficult experience for them, they have shown incredible resilience. Our bonds are stronger than ever. I want to thank this community once more. This will be my last post on this chapter of my life. My focus is now fully on the future, on raising my children, and on creating a new life with them. Next story. My name is Alex. I'm in my early 30s. My older brother is David, and he's a few years my senior. Growing up, we were like typical brothers. We weren't incredibly close buddies who did everything together, but we weren't enemies either. We'd meet up at holidays and family gatherings, perhaps grab a coffee or watch a game from time to time. Our parents remained together. We have a rather large family nearby, aunts, uncles, cousins, and we see them quite often. David began dating Amy roughly 2 years before they became engaged. She seemed all right when I first met her. She was pleasant enough at family dinners. She held a regular job. David seemed content with her, and our parents liked her as well. They announced their wedding plans roughly 8 months before the incident I'm about to describe. David is quite careful with his finances. He always has been. He worked steadily and saved diligently. He had a particular plan he'd mentioned to me a few times over the past year. He wished to save a decent amount of money, roughly $30,000, to make a down payment on a house he hoped to buy soon. He held these funds in a particular savings account he'd maintained for a long while, which offered him additional money for leaving it there. The initial indication that something was amiss occurred a couple of months after David and Amy announced their engagement. It was during a family barbecue at my parents' home. There were many people present, scattered across the yard and on the porch. I was passing an open window at the rear of the house when I overheard Amy speaking inside. She was on a call. I couldn't catch all of what she said as the audio was intermittent, but I gathered enough to know her topic, which made me halt. Her discussion concerned money. I caught her mention $30,000, then something about relocating it, and then crypto. She let out a slight, high-pitched laugh. "He won't even realize for a long time," she stated. I missed the remainder of the conversation, but her manner of speaking suggested she was doing something underhanded with these funds. She mentioned something concerning their future, but it appeared more like she was utilizing these funds for her own future, not a joint effort with David, and she was appropriating it from him. I didn't catch every word, but hearing $30,000 immediately after David had shared his $30,000 house savings goal remained in my thoughts. During the following week, I attempted to subtly bring up his finances with David. I inquired about the progress of his house savings, asking if he was nearing his objective. He behaved unusually unlike his typical self. He merely stated it was all fine, that everything was progressing as planned. This struck me as odd, as he typically enjoyed discussing his saving progress. I began observing matters more closely. Amy abruptly possessed a new costly bracelet she hadn't owned previously. Additionally, she went on a weekend trip with her friends that appeared costly and materialized rapidly. Considered individually, these things didn't prove anything, but when combined with what I'd heard her say, they caused me concern. I sensed I needed to inform David about what I'd heard. I requested he meet me for coffee at a place where we could speak confidentially. I recounted what I'd overheard as calmly as possible. I mentioned I'd heard Amy discussing $30,000, something about crypto, and transferring the money without his awareness. I explained my location when I heard it, and why it troubled me, particularly with his house savings plan. He immediately became angry and disbelieved me. He claimed I must have misheard. He suggested I was likely just envious because he was marrying and settling down ahead of me. He declined to even consider that Amy would act in such a way. He stated Amy informed him of everything, including their finances. I highlighted the bracelet and the trip, inquiring about the source of her funds for those items, and proposed he verify his savings account balance to be certain. He ceased discussing it entirely. He asserted he trusted Amy completely, and that I ought to cease creating issues without cause. I made another attempt a few days later. I sent him a text message reiterating my concerns, hoping he would read it privately and reflect upon it. He simply responded, saying, "Leave it alone, Alex. You are mistaken." Subsequently, communicating with each other grew challenging. He didn't return my calls promptly, and When we did speak, it was brief and courteous, but as if we were distant from one another. I was aware their engagement celebration was approaching quickly. It was set to be a significant occasion with all the relatives and acquaintances. The idea of him marrying someone I genuinely believed had taken a substantial sum of money from him, funds he diligently saved for a major life objective, felt incredibly burdensome and unsettling. I felt it was my responsibility, as his brother, to prevent what I viewed as a significant error, a marriage commencing with deceit. I considered doing nothing, but the prospect of Amy getting away with seizing his money and David marrying her, perhaps never discovering it until it was too late, felt improper. The strain between us intensified as the day of the party drew nearer. David was evidently irritated that I wouldn't abandon the topic, and I became increasingly certain I was correct and exasperated that he wouldn't heed me. The engagement celebration took place at a rented venue. David's and Amy's families were present, along with many of their friends. Approximately 80 individuals altogether. There were plans for people to deliver speeches. David and Amy circulated as people offered their congratulations. My parents had instructed me prior to the party to simply be pleasant and avoid causing any issues, which made me feel even more uncertain about my course of action. Witnessing David appear joyful and oblivious, with Amy standing right there, knowing what I believed she had done, grew overwhelming as the evening progressed. I concluded that waiting or attempting to speak with him privately once more was pointless. He had not listened previously. I sensed this matter needed to be revealed before everyone, anticipating that startling people and the presence of their families and friends would compel David to truly listen or prompt Amy to react in a manner that indicated her guilt. During a lull between the scheduled speeches, with most guests seated, I stood close to the small stage area. I stepped onto it and grasped a microphone that someone had left behind. For an instant, everyone ceased speaking and stared at me, bewildered. David and Amy were situated across the room by the tables where their families were seated. I drew a deep breath and spoke into the microphone so all could hear me across the hall. I stated my name and identified myself as David's brother. I declared I had something significant to say about Amy. My parents appeared shocked and distressed from their seats. David's head snapped around, and his expression shifted from puzzled to furious. I stated plainly that I had overheard Amy discussing taking $30,000 of David's money. I mentioned she spoke of investing it in crypto and that she intended to do so without his awareness. I explained I had informed David of this, but he disbelieved me, and I felt compelled to tell everyone because David merited knowing the truth about the person he intended to marry, and both his family and hers deserved to know as well. Immediately, people began shouting and growing agitated. Amy gasped very loudly, then began weeping and concealing her face. David shouted my name and started forcing his way through the crowd toward the stage, his face flushed crimson with rage. Individuals from Amy's family were yelling at me. My own parents were frantically waving their hands at me, silently pleading for me to stop. People in the crowd spoke to each other in hushed tones. Some stood up for a clearer view. David reached the stage area. He didn't even attempt to speak quietly. As soon as he was near, he swung his arm and punched me forcefully in the face. The blow caused me to reel backward. He yelled that I was fabricating, that I was destroying everything, that I was insane. Her mother attempted to console her. David ordered me to leave, stating he didn't want me there, didn't want me in his life. Security personnel hired for the party swiftly intervened, due to the commotion and the physical altercation. David pointed at me and instructed them to remove me. Amy's family also urged them to escort me out. My parents appeared genuinely sorrowful and distressed, but they did not intervene to shield me. They seemed preoccupied with de-escalating the situation and coping with the shock of the punch. I set the microphone down. There was no purpose in uttering anything further with everyone in such a state and after being struck. The security guards took hold of my arms and guided me firmly though not roughly, toward the exit. As they escorted me out, David continued shouting remarks at me from the stage area. Amy was still crying very loudly, creating the impression that she was the innocent victim of an unprovoked attack. I made eye contact with my parents for a moment before I was outside. Their expressions conveyed shock, embarrassment, and deep distress. I stood alone outside the hall. My face ached where David had struck me. I walked away from the building. My phone began ringing almost immediately. It was my mother. Her voice was trembling. She didn't shout, but she was clearly very upset. She stated I had caused a terrible commotion, that I had mortified everyone, particularly David and Amy, and that I had incited David to a physical response. She reiterated David's assertion that I was attempting to destroy his happiness, and had caused him to hit me by making false accusations in front of everyone. She said David was convinced I was lying and that he was deeply hurt that I would act in such a way. She mentioned David had informed her he no longer wished to speak with me, and given what transpired, particularly the physical aspect of the dispute, it was likely better if I avoided family gatherings for some time. My parents clearly sided with David, concentrating on how my behavior caused the conflict, and prioritizing de-escalating the situation and not disrupting the wedding arrangements above discovering the truth about Amy. Other relatives also telephoned me. Some were stunned by the punch during the incident. Others still agreed with David. A few questioned me, but primarily advised me to apologize and attempt to mend things, which I saw no possibility of doing since I felt I was correct regarding Amy's behavior, and David's response had been physical and over the top. David did not respond to my calls or messages. He had essentially removed me from his life following the altercation. The period after the engagement celebration felt isolating. My face remained bruised for several days. I was not involved in any of the family discussions regarding the wedding. When I encountered relatives, interactions were awkward. A distinct tension was present. David and Amy had shared their account of events with everyone, claiming I had fabricated a malicious story without cause, solely to create problems, and had provoked David to react as he did. My parents did not entirely cease speaking with me, but they maintained their distance. They were visibly strained by the family issues, and wished to avoid damaging their relationship with David, particularly after the highly public altercation. My concerns about the missing money appeared less significant than the difficulties I had created at the gathering and the resulting physical fight. Everyone concentrated on my actions, David's response, and the supposed harm I had caused David and Amy. The wedding preparations continued. No one in the family, to my knowledge, requested David to examine his bank accounts or questioned Amy regarding my statements about the money. Even following the major incident at the engagement party and David isolating me, the wedding took place a few months later, exactly as planned. I received no invitation, and I anticipated none. I remained home that day. Life continued. I concentrated on my employment and spent time with my personal friends. They were aware of my family's situation and offered an ear, primarily without advising me on how to handle the significant family division. David and Amy made no contact. My connection with my parents grew cautious. We steered clear of discussing anything challenging. We were aware David wasn't speaking to me, but we rarely mentioned. Recently, however, my mother's manner of speaking about matters began to shift somewhat. She seemed to be withholding information, exercising caution. She noted that David appeared stressed, and that he and Amy had been quarreling. Initially, she didn't specify precisely what was occurring, only stating they were experiencing marital difficulties. This marked the first occasion I learned of any genuine issues between them since their wedding. Several days ago, my mother telephoned me directly, which deviated from her typical brief calls. She appeared quite distressed. She informed me that David had discovered messages on Amy's mobile device. She stated the communications were with other males. My mother wasn't certain of the precise number, but she mentioned Amy had been conversing with three distinct individuals in a manner unequivocally inappropriate for a married person. She stated one of the individuals was someone David recognized, someone he frequently encountered at the fitness center. My mother indicated David came across the messages without anticipation. He presented them to Amy and questioned her regarding them. They engaged in a significant dispute. My mother mentioned Amy didn't deny conversing with the men, but she attempted to downplay its significance, or asserted it was David's culpability for some motive. My mother was unaware of the extent of their conversations or the duration it had persisted. She stated David felt deeply wounded and enraged. He was distressed not merely due to her infidelity, but also because she had deceived him. Their current situation between David and Amy is highly strained. They reside together, yet are perpetually quarreling. This information concerning Amy's infidelity has also reached other relatives. It has triggered a fresh surge of surprise and discussion, but at present, everyone is concentrating on the infidelity. The $30,000 theft I had cautioned against has not been mentioned, as linked to this new issue in the family discussions I've learned of. David is grappling with the immediate issue of his wife's unfaithfulness. The marriage which held more significance for him than his connection with me, and which he proceeded with even after I cautioned him, is now facing major difficulties due to Amy's actions. The negative consequences of his choice to fully trust Amy and disregard my concerns are beginning to emerge, despite it being a different deception than the one I spoke of. My dilemma isn't about determining if I should reach out to David regarding the infidelity. That's unfeasible since he severed ties with me. It pertains to the entire circumstance. I remain estranged from my brother because I attempted to inform everyone his fiancée embezzled his funds. Presently, 6 months after the marriage that cost me that bond, he is discovering his wife has been deceiving him significantly, which indicates I was correct about her character, even if the new falsehood differs. The family's demeanor is altering somewhat as more individuals perceive Amy's true nature, but the primary issue stemming from the engagement party and his estrangement from me persists. I am observing the negative outcomes unfold from a distance, still beyond the family sphere David currently inhabits. Update 1. I appreciate everyone who read my initial post and offered their perspectives. Several points arose repeatedly that I can clarify further. Numerous individuals inquired if I possessed any concrete evidence, apart from merely overhearing Amy's discussion. The answer is no. My choice to speak out at the gathering was solely founded on what I overheard her state, coupled with David's sudden peculiar behavior regarding his savings, and Amy expending funds in manners that appeared inconsistent with her employment. I lacked access to David's bank accounts, and possessed no means to verify Amy's finances or whether she held cryptocurrency. I attempted to persuade David to review his personal accounts, but he declined. The absence of concrete proof was a significant factor in why David and the family disbelieved me, and why they perceived my conduct as simply fabricating issues to create problems. The discussion I overheard was sufficiently detailed, referencing the sum of money, her method of transferring it, cryptocurrency, and her belief that David would not detect it. This rendered it highly serious within the context, but it remained merely something I heard her utter to another person, not her confessing to me she committed the act or a documented record indicating she took the funds. A few individuals inquired if anyone else might have overheard Amy speaking. The gathering was noisy, and she was indoors close to an open window while I was outdoors. It's conceivable someone else was near enough to hear, but they were likely occupied conversing with others. I observed no one else respond as though they had heard what I did. It's also conceivable I only heard the parts of her conversation that were most audible or distinct. My initial post's content stems from the precise phrases and the context I overheard. that caused my concern. Regarding David's financial state prior to this, as I mentioned, he was prudent and a good saver. He had no financial need. This partly explains why a $30,000 disappearance might not be immediately apparent, unless he regularly checked that particular savings account balance, which he might not have been doing, perhaps only as he neared the house purchase. Amy held a typical job. Her income appeared ordinary. It wasn't as if she would abruptly possess additional funds for costly jewelry or travel without utilizing David's money or their joint funds. Multiple comments questioned whether it would have been preferable to speak with David privately, rather than addressing it before everyone. As I detailed in the initial post, I had already attempted to discuss it with David in private multiple times, after overhearing Amy. I conveyed my concerns and proposed he review his finances. Each instance he became irate and disbelieved me, declining to even consider that I could be correct. My motive for speaking out publicly, which I acknowledge created many difficulties, was a final effort to reach him and penetrate the barrier he had erected. I hoped the surprise would compel him to investigate the matter, or prompt Amy to react in a manner indicating her guilt. It was a substantial gamble, and it did not unfold as I had wished. After composing the initial post and reviewing the various comments, some of which concurred, Amy seemed problematic, and others that believed I managed the situation poorly, I reflected on my position. Nothing had altered since my posting. David remained estranged, the wedding had occurred, and now I was learning via other family members that Amy was being unfaithful. The primary issue I described in the initial post involved observing the negative consequences of David's choice unfold from a distance, following my actions that led him to sever ties with me. I didn't have to undertake any immediate steps concerning the infidelity itself, given that I don't communicate with David. My considerations after the first post weren't focused on how to address David's marital difficulties, but rather on my own standing within the family and with David, now that further issues with Amy had surfaced. Some individuals proposed making contact with David, given that he might now be more receptive due to his marital problems. However, reflecting on the events of the past year, my attempts to caution him were not merely disregarded. He became enraged and struck me while entirely terminating our relationship because of those attempts. What I did at the engagement party, even though it was my choice, resulted in a deep and public break between us. David made his choice very clear then. He chose Amy, believing her side over mine, his brother's, and over our relationship. He showed this again by marrying and not having me there. Even though learning Amy cheated might lessen his trust in her, it doesn't automatically fix the damage to our brotherly bond or the trust he broke by cutting me off so easily. My action, though it cost me much, was an attempt to stop him from being seriously wronged. His reaction was to put his relationship with the person I thought was wronging him first, to the extent of cutting me out. Considering all this history, trying to start talking again now, particularly by implying "I told you so," even without words, didn't feel helpful. It would likely just reignite his anger, or at best, he might only listen because he's having problems now. Our estrangement wasn't merely a brief period of silence. It was a clear statement of how he felt back then. Reflecting, I decided that trying to contact him or fix things because he was having problems now wouldn't lead to anything good. Based on these thoughts, I decided to keep things as they were with David, meaning no contact. I made no attempt to contact him after learning of Amy's infidelity. I neither messaged him, called him, nor sought to meet him. My actions were, essentially, nothing concerning direct talks with David and Amy. I also opted to maintain speaking with my him. What I did was, in essence, nothing when it came to speaking directly to David and Amy. I also chose to continue speaking to my parents as I had been, which was limited. I continued answering their calls and messages, but didn't ask for many details about David's issues, or state my opinion on Amy's infidelity or its connection to my initial warning. I listened to what they opted to share about the troubles in David's marriage, without saying anything that might suggest I was pleased to be correct or attempting to vindicate myself. When other family members spoke to me, I acted similarly. I mentioned I had heard there were problems between David and Amy and said little more, avoiding discussion about past events or my actions. The immediate outcome of this approach was that things remained precisely the same with David. He didn't contact me at all. He didn't react to my lack of contact, likely because he was dealing with the significant problems in his marriage. My limited discussions with my parents remained difficult, but acceptable. They were clearly distressed about David's situation and perhaps a little uncertain due to what had happened before, but they didn't attempt to fix things between David and me. They also didn't directly state that Amy's current dishonesty confirmed my earlier warning about her character was right. The family conversations, from what I gathered, remained focused on the cheating as the main problem. Update 2. It's been roughly 6 months since I wrote the last update. This means it's now roughly a year since David and Amy married, and roughly a year and a half since I first heard Amy discuss the $30,000. Much has transpired since David learned of Amy's cheating via her texts. After David uncovered the messages and spoke to her about it, things deteriorated significantly in their shared home. According to what I've heard secondhand from my mother and a cousin who sometimes speaks with me, they had numerous loud arguments. Amy did not move out immediately, but cohabiting was very difficult, full of tension, and they rarely spoke unless to argue. Further details about Amy's messages with other men gradually emerged, at least among family members aware of the situation. They weren't just a few harmless texts. The messages revealed she was having ongoing, inappropriate relationships with more than one person. The gym acquaintance whom David reportedly questioned initially claimed limited interaction with Amy, but he had to admit involvement when David showed him the messages. This was an added layer of hurt for David, coming from someone he considered a friend. Within a few weeks after David discovered Amy did move out of his home. They didn't file for divorce right away, but they were no longer living together because they couldn't get along. Their marriage wasn't officially over at that moment, but the life they shared ended. People said David was very upset, not solely because she cheated, but because he grasped that the woman he had defended and married was capable of intentionally lying and hurting him in that way. What's interesting is that with the clear evidence that Amy was dishonest because she cheated, some family members who had sided with David against me at the engagement party began to view things differently. Or at least they ceased being so certain that I was entirely wrong when I cautioned them about the money. My mother, especially, has spoken to me more candidly. She hasn't directly apologized for not believing me or for agreeing with David when he cut me off. But when she speaks about Amy now, you can sense that she doesn't approve and is disappointed in her. She has made comments about how David should have heeded his gut feeling, though she still doesn't directly state he should have listened to me specifically or concerning the money. Even with this slight shift in how some family members perceive Amy, and perhaps quietly concurring that she wasn't who she appeared to be, my direct relationship with David has not improved. He is still focused on addressing the problems caused by his marriage dissolving due to the cheating. He is managing the practical aspects that come with separating, determining what to do with their belongings, and coping with how deeply the lying hurt him. My life remains distinct from David's marital troubles. I learn of developments through the few family members I still talk to, and I am adhering to my decision not to contact him first. I have observed the consequences of David's choices unfold. He disregarded a warning about his fiancée's character, married her even after the warning created issues with me, and is now facing severe difficulties due to that same individual's character, which manifested as infidelity. The situation clearly illustrates how disregarding significant concerns about a person's integrity can lead to major complications, even if those issues aren't precisely what was anticipated from the initial warning. Brief update. It's now been a few days since the last update. Following all that time without communication, an unexpected event occurred a few days ago. David called me. He didn't immediately begin discussing everything that had transpired. Initially, there was some silence. Then he began discussing the engagement party, about what I said and how he reacted. He admitted he was mistaken. He stated that excluding me from his life was an error. He expressed regret for not trusting me when I attempted to caution him about Amy. He also apologized for the physical altercation at the party, for hitting me. He said his response was entirely inappropriate, even though he was angry and shocked at that moment. He clarified that he felt I kept pressing the issue, making his personal matters public after he had already asked me to cease, which intensified his anger at that moment, causing him to hit me. He apologized for all his actions that alienated me and damaged our relationship. He then began discussing the money, the $30,000. He mentioned that after he discovered Amy was cheating, he began investigating other matters that had appeared odd, including his financial situation. He began asking Amy more direct questions, probing her stories. He had previously given her the $30,000. Amy had informed him she required a substantial loan, approximately $30,000, because her friend needed emergency surgery she couldn't afford, and Amy wished to assist her. David trusted her and transferred the funds to her. He believed it was a loan she or her friend would repay. He mentioned Amy had made him promise not to disclose the loan to anyone because she stated her friend was private and didn't want anyone knowing about the surgery or needing funds. That's why David hadn't informed me or anyone else about providing her with such a large sum. Through his investigation after the affair came to light, he recently found out that the story about the friend's surgery was a complete fabrication Amy created to obtain the money from him. There was no friend who required surgery. She had simply taken the money he gave her and utilized it for her own ends, which likely involved the crypto I had overheard about. He now understands that my warning about the money, while I believed she had taken it secretly, was indicating her dishonesty with his funds and her use of methods like crypto to obscure where the money went, even if the initial transfer was him willingly giving it to her based on her lie. The part I overheard, he won't even notice for ages, now makes sense to him. She meant he wouldn't notice the money was permanently gone, or that the loan wasn't being repaid because the surgery story was fake and she had no intention of returning it, possibly concealing it through crypto channels. He told me he confronted Amy about this as well. After discovering the truth, she admitted the lie about the surgery. He demanded she return the $30,000. According to David, Amy is refusing to return the money. She's claiming it was a gift, or that she no longer possesses it, or offering other excuses. So the money is gone. She lied to acquire it, and she is not returning it. But I am quite certain it's in some kind of crypto wallet or site. Hearing all this from David after such a long time felt odd. He acknowledged he was mistaken about me, about Amy, about his reaction. It wasn't a pleasant conversation, just him explaining what he'd uncovered and owning his errors and the truth of Amy's deceit that went beyond just the cheating. I still don't know if I should forgive him after learning all that. The final story for today. Greetings, everyone. I'm using a different account for privacy. I'm a 35-year-old man. Let's refer to me as Alex. My wife Carmilla is 33. We've been married for 5 years and together for 8. Until lately, I believed we had a stable, though occasionally quiet, life. The central issue here, indirectly, involved our dog, Buddy. Buddy was a Labrador mix, and I'd had him for around 14 years. He was with me even before Carmilla and I met. He was an elderly dog, quiet, and a steady presence in my life and later in ours. Carmilla also came to love him, though he was always my dog in a sense. Beyond my professional life, I have a notable hobby, a YouTube channel. It isn't something that generates much money, not yet at least, but it's a profound passion. I create in-depth video essays on retro video game history and preservation. This requires considerable research, script writing, capturing footage from original hardware, editing, and voiceover work. The hard drive Carmilla erased held approximately 2 full years of ongoing projects, archive material, raw footage, edited videos, and all my planning documents. Some of it had been backed up infrequently, but a huge amount of recent, irreplaceable work from the past several months, including a nearly finished major project, existed solely on that primary drive. I'm not someone who expresses emotions in a very outward or vocal manner. I tend to process matters internally. This is pertinent. Buddy's health had been worsening for the majority of a year. It began with him becoming slower. Then his arthritis grew more acute. This involved numerous vet appointments, various medicines, and specific diets. I managed the majority of his care's practicalities, looking into treatments, overseeing his medication timing, and adjusting our house to ease his comfort. Carmilla was frequently noticeably distressed throughout this time, often in tears when observing Buddy or following vet visits. I was naturally deeply sorrowful about his deterioration, but my concentration remained on his comfort and pain management. Roughly 3 weeks ago, following an especially tough night for Buddy, the vet verified what we both understood was inevitable. His life quality was greatly diminished, and there was little else that could be done to lessen his pain. We reached the mutual decision to put him to sleep. I scheduled the appointment for the next afternoon. Carmilla was extremely emotional, weeping periodically in the time leading up to it. I concentrated on ensuring Buddy's final day was as comfortable as could be, offering him his preferred treats, and spending calm moments with him. At the animal clinic, the personnel were empathetic. Carmilla was audibly crying during the entire process. I remained there, stroking Buddy, speaking gently to him as he drifted off. I experienced a deep sense of bereavement, a silent desolation. However, I did not shed tears. I didn't cry aloud or collapse emotionally. I kept my composure. Once the vet confirmed Buddy had gone, I made arrangements for his cremation and for his remains to be brought back to us. The drive home was strained. Carmilla continued to cry, but then she faced me and asked how I could simply sit there without shedding a tear. She remarked it seemed as if it didn't faze me at all. I attempted to clarify that I was profoundly impacted. Very much so, but I simply processed grief in a different manner, that my sorrow was not for public display. She appeared unwilling to accept this. During the following week, the atmosphere at home became progressively tense. Carmilla was remote, occasionally uttering sharp remarks about my seeming absence of emotion. She commented with remarks like, "You're like a machine at times," or "It's as if nothing can affect you." I repeated that I was grieving, but it was not an act. I was endeavoring to allow her room for her own grief, presuming she required it. I concentrated on my job and my YouTube projects, in part as a way to cope, and in part because I had self-imposed deadlines. The central occurrence happened last Tuesday, approximately 10 days after we euthanized Buddy. I returned home from work. Carmilla was awaiting in the living room. She had a peculiar, almost defiant expression on her face. She began by stating she had been deeply concerned for me, that my reaction to Buddy's death was not typical, that it was not human to refrain from crying in that situation. She said she felt as though she no longer knew who I was. Then she informed me she had done something. She motioned toward my office. She said she needed to witness me experience something, truly collapse and display emotion. She then declared, quite clearly, that she had erased my primary YouTube project hard drive. This drive held, as I noted, my primary YouTube project hard drive. This drive contained, as I mentioned, 2 years of careful labor, hundreds, if not thousands, of hours. She uttered something along the lines of, "I simply wished to witness you collapse emotionally. I needed to observe that you were capable of feeling loss. It's beneficial for you to finally display some emotion." I recall simply gazing at her. I entered my office, powered on my computer, and accessed the drive. It was entirely blank, erased. 2 years of effort simply vanished. The unedited footage from my current series, the revised timelines, the research documents, scripts, resources, everything. My most recent thorough backup was, to my dismay, roughly 4 months old, meaning the past 4 months of focused effort, including a nearly complete 40-minute documentary video, had entirely and completely disappeared. My response was not what she appeared to anticipate. I neither cried nor screamed. I experienced a chilling, nauseating sensation sweep over me. It was a sensation of deep betrayal and infringement. This wasn't merely data. It was my time, my zeal, my creation. She had deliberately ruined something extraordinarily significant to me, something she understood was vital, to elicit a particular response from me, to correct what she viewed as my emotional deficiency. I faced her. I don't remember my precise words, but I informed her that her actions were foolish and that I couldn't grasp why she would commit such an act. She then began to appear somewhat unsure, perhaps understanding she had misjudged the situation. She started to say something about merely wanting me to be all right, to engage with my feelings. I did not interact further. I proceeded to our bedroom and packed a compact suitcase containing clothes and necessities. Carmilla pursued me, beginning to sound distressed. She claimed she didn't understand, that she was just so distressed about Buddy and my reaction, and she believed if I could only cry, everything would improve. Her excuses seemed empty and self-interested. I informed her that I was unable to remain in the same home with her. I exited, got into my vehicle, and drove to a close-by hotel. I have remained there ever since. The following morning, Wednesday, I reached out to a divorce attorney and had an initial meeting. I detailed the circumstances. The attorney was, to state it mildly, astonished by the details. I have begun the legal process. I sent Carmilla a concise text message indicating that I had departed, was secure, had sought legal advice, and that all subsequent communication should go through them for now. This leads me to the current moment. It has been slightly more than a week since my departure. Carmilla has been inundating my phone with calls and messages, which I have mostly disregarded. She has also attempted to contact me via my sister and a few shared friends. They have conveyed that she is deeply upset and regretful. Yesterday, my sister delivered a lengthy handwritten letter from Carmilla. In it, Carmilla asserts that she now grasps the enormity of her actions. She wrote that her conduct originated from her own deep-seated insecurities and a distorted view of my grief, or its absence in her opinion. She mentioned she felt that if I didn't grieve Buddy in a manner she comprehended, it implied I didn't genuinely love him, or by extension her. She asserts the act of ruining my drive was a desperate, mistaken effort to compel an emotional bond she perceived as absent, stemming from her own fear and sorrow. She states she has already sought and completed an initial session with a therapist. She is pleading with me to halt the divorce proceedings and engage in marriage counseling with her. She says she will do anything to regain my trust, even though she recognizes it might be unachievable. I am still recovering from the betrayal. The devastation of my work is one matter. The reasoning behind it is quite another. To purposefully harm someone to provoke a specific emotional reaction feels manipulative and harsh on a plane I am struggling to comprehend. The lawyer has cautioned that from a legal perspective, this act of ruination might be viewed as a depletion of assets, although the worth of a passion project is challenging to measure in such terms. It's more about the intention and the infringement. Nevertheless, she is my wife. We have constructed a life together over 8 years. Prior to this, I would never have conceived her capable of such a deed. Could it be that sorrow and uncertainty might cause someone to act so uncharacteristically? Her letter appears to convey sincere regret, and she has independently sought therapy. Therefore, my inquiry is, am I utterly insane to even contemplate halting the divorce and trying marriage counseling? Or is this deed so outrageous that dissolving the marriage is the sole sensible reaction? I require an external viewpoint. Update. 1. Firstly, I wish to convey my appreciation to everyone who dedicated their time to read my initial message and provide their viewpoints. The opinions differed, spanning from instant and absolute divorce to thoughts of counseling, with numerous suggestions landing in the middle. Your contributions have been precious as I navigate this situation. I must clarify some matters that arose often in the feedback, as my first post was composed while I was still in a state of dismay and perhaps didn't address everything sufficiently. 1. Numerous inquiries concerned the character and importance of the channel and the missing data. It was more than just a casual hobby. While it wasn't my main source of income, I had a small but loyal viewership, about 15K subscribers, and I was starting to monetize it a little. More importantly, it was a major creative outlet, and something I dedicated endless hours to out of pure passion. As I noted, I had a backup, but it was from early July. The time between July and October was incredibly productive. I had finished principal recording and the rough assembly of a major 2-part documentary series I'd been working on for over a year, plus several shorter videos. All the unique footage captured, the project files, updated scripts, and specific assets for these, that's what's lost. The estimate of 2 years of work refers to the foundational material on the drive, but the most severe loss is those 4 months of concentrated recent progress. Some inquired if data recovery was possible. I consulted a specialist, and since it was a standard format and not a physically damaged drive, the chances of recovering anything meaningful are almost nil. 2. I am not without emotion. I feel things profoundly. However, my expression of grief, or really many strong emotions, tends to be quiet and internal. When Buddy passed away, I was heartbroken. He had been my companion for nearly half my life. My way of honoring him was to ensure his passing was peaceful and to remember him fondly, not through outward displays of sorrow. Carmilla has known me for 8 years. My more stoic nature is not new to her, though perhaps she never fully grasped or accepted it, especially amidst her own sorrow. 3. Several commenters inquired if there were earlier warning signs or similar behaviors from Carmilla. Frankly, no. Nothing of this magnitude, or even remotely hinting at this kind of destructive or manipulative action. There were normal marital disputes, moments of her feeling insecure or requiring affirmation, but never an instance of her purposely ruining something of mine or acting with such deliberate cruelty. This is what made the incident so deeply shocking and unsettling. After posting and reviewing many of the replies, I spent considerable time reflecting. The anger and sense of betrayal are still quite strong. Many comments confirmed my initial impulse to proceed with the divorce, emphasizing the gravity of the breach of trust. Others suggested that if Carmilla's regret was sincere and she was genuinely dedicated to therapy and comprehending her behavior, counseling could provide a way to understanding, even if not to reconciliation. My attorney had already submitted the initial divorce documents. Carmilla received the papers soon after my initial post. This, I believe, further emphasized the gravity of the circumstances for her. I decided that before making an irreversible decision to finalize the divorce without any further discussion, I would meet with Carmilla. I needed to see her, to hear her in person, away from the filter of texts or letters. I agreed to meet her last week. I stated clearly this was not a reconciliation meeting, but an opportunity for me to listen before deciding on my next steps concerning the counseling she had requested. When we met, Carmilla was visibly distressed. She didn't attempt to make excuses for what she had requested. When we met, Carmilla was visibly distressed. She didn't try to justify her actions. She repeated much of what was in her letter, that her sorrow over Buddy along with her seeing my stoicism as an absence of love or concern, had led her to act from a place of deep fear and insecurity. She mentioned she felt as though she was losing me, that I was emotionally distant, and in a strange way, she believed that by provoking a strong emotional response, any response, it would somehow close that perceived distance, or show I still cared. She talked about her first few therapy sessions and how she was starting to examine these insecurities and her dysfunctional coping mechanisms. She showed me appointment cards for future therapy sessions. She cried, apologized profusely, and said she understood if I could not ever forgive her, but begged for an opportunity to try and mend the harm through joint counseling. She clearly stated she knew she couldn't reverse the damage to my work, and that it was a terrible act. I listened without speaking much for a long time. Then I explained my stance. I told her that trust, once broken to this extent, is not easily, if ever, completely rebuilt. I explained the gravity of the transgression, not just of my work, but of my personal limits and her position as my partner. I told her that even if we were to try counseling, the divorce proceedings would stay active, simply on hold. I would not be returning to the house at this time. I then outlined my terms if I were to consent to counseling. 1. She must continue her individual therapy consistently. 2. We would choose a marriage counselor jointly, prioritizing one skilled in matters of trust and communication. I would have the ultimate decision if consensus wasn't possible. 3. There were to be no anticipation of instant forgiveness or a return to ordinary life. This would be a lengthy, difficult journey with no assured result. 4. I would need to see steady, evident change in her behavior, comprehension, and responsibility. Any pushing or effort to hasten the process would result in me instantly resuming the divorce proceedings. 5. We would need to set distinct limits concerning personal space, projects, and emotional display. I stated clearly that my readiness to even attempt counseling depended on her absolute compliance with these terms, and that I was approaching this with deep skepticism. I also informed her that the YouTube project, in its current form, is dead to me for now. The idea of attempting to rebuild it fills me with a feeling of exhaustion linked to this incident. Carmilla consented to every condition without delay. She seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation and the fragility of this opportunity. She thanked me for being prepared to even contemplate it. So that's our current position. I have directed my attorney to pause the divorce proceedings, awaiting the result of a serious effort at marriage counseling. We have a list of prospective therapists we are examining. It feels more like selecting the slightly less dreadful path from two very challenging choices. There's a part of me that thinks this is a colossal error, but another part that feels I owe it to the 8 years we shared before this to at least investigate if anything is recoverable, particularly given her swift engagement in therapy and stated regret. I'm uncertain if I'm making the correct decision. Update 2. It has been approximately 6 months since my previous update, which I now refer to internally as D-Day. I felt it was suitable to offer an update on the circumstances, as many individuals dedicated their time and thoughts to my initial posts. Much has occurred, yet in some respects, it feels like we've only just started a very long journey. As I noted in my previous update, Carmilla and I consented to try marriage counseling, and she was to carry on with her individual therapy. Both of these activities have been occurring regularly. We located a marriage counselor who focuses on relational trauma and communication failures. The sessions, both together and sometimes individual, as advised by the counselor to address specific issues to return to joint sessions, have been exceptionally difficult. There are no soft terms for it. It's been agonizing, exposed, and profoundly uneasy for us both. Carmilla's personal therapy has been crucial, as per our marriage counselor and from what Carmilla has disclosed, with her consent and frequently during the joint sessions. She has explored deep-seated insecurities that existed before our relationship, arising from her early life and previous relationship dynamics. Her dread of abandonment and her inclination to overreact to perceived emotional distance from me were evidently primary triggers. The action of ruining my YouTube project, she has realized in therapy, was a profoundly flawed and damaging protest behavior, an effort to compel a bond and comfort when she felt extremely insecure and overlooked, especially following her profound sorrow for Buddy and her misunderstanding of my own grieving process. This is naturally an explanation, not a justification, a difference our counselor has stressed often. As for me, the counseling has compelled me to scrutinize how I communicate. While I uphold my stance that my way of grieving internally is legitimate, I've gained insight into how my reserved manner and occasional quietness might be seen by a partner, especially one with prior insecurities, like Carmilla's. It's become evident that I am not to blame for Carmilla's actions, but comprehending the interplay from both perspectives has been a component of the healing process. Much attention has been paid to how we express, or neglect to express, our needs and feelings more constructively. Regarding tangible actions and shifts, Carmilla has remained steady. She has not skipped a therapy session, whether individual or shared. She has engaged actively, even when it was challenging for her to face her own conduct and its consequences. Aided by our therapist, she wrote me another letter, this time not apologizing, but taking responsibility. It spelled out her grasp of the particular harm she inflicted, the breach of trust, the disregard for my passion and work, the emotional manipulation woven into her act, and the fear it put in me. This was a tough letter for her to write and for me to read, but it seemed more concrete than just spoken apologies. As for the YouTube project, I haven't been able to make myself try to recreate it again. I did manage to retrieve some older RAW files from different SD cards and a cloud backup I'd overlooked, but it's not the same. Living arrangements. For the first 3 months of counseling, I found myself a short-term apartment and stayed there. And after extensive discussion, both inside and outside of therapy, and observing a steady pattern of effort from Carmilla, I accepted a change. Around 3 months ago, I moved back into our house, though into the guest bedroom. The divorce proceedings are still officially on hold. My lawyer knows about the continuing counseling and our current living situation. There's no discussion of calling off the divorce filing at this stage. That step, if it ever occurs, is a long way off. This will probably be my last update for the foreseeable future, or perhaps ever. The process ahead is lengthy and private. Thanks to everyone who listened and shared their thoughts. It was useful to explain this somewhere during the initial shock. Update 3. Hello again, Reddit. It has been a considerable amount of time since my last update, about a year and 4 months. When I last posted, my wife Carmilla and I were residing as housemates while undergoing marriage counseling after her devastating act of wiping my YouTube hard drive. I truly didn't know then if our marriage could survive, or even if it should. Many of you shared advice, and I know the situation seemed bleak. I believed it was important to provide a final chapter to this story, given how invested many of you were in following it. The past year and a half has been the most difficult time of our lives, individually and as a couple. We dedicated ourselves completely to the marriage counseling, and Carmilla persisted with her intensive individual therapy. There were numerous hours of difficult conversations, uncomfortable self-reflection from both of us, and moments where it seemed like the gap between us was too vast to close. After about 6 months of residing apart within the same home, with steady positive interactions and therapy breakthroughs, we started spending more meaningful time together. It began with meals shared, then evenings spent talking, genuinely talking, in a way we hadn't for years. The guest room door ultimately remained open most of the time. The restoration of emotional closeness gradually made room for physical intimacy's return. Around 8 months ago, I returned to our shared bedroom. The divorce proceedings were formally retracted around 6 months ago. After a lengthy discussion with our therapist, and then between ourselves, We both felt sure that we were creating something new and stronger. My lawyer was, I believe, a little surprised but supportive when I asked him to file the dismissal. What about the YouTube project, the cause of so much pain? For a long time, I couldn't make myself even think about it. However, around 6 months ago, Carmilla did something unexpected. She had found an old notebook where I'd noted down some initial ideas for that lost documentary series. She hadn't tried to rewrite it or anything like that. She'd just carefully scanned the pages and arranged them, along with some public domain images and research links she believed might be pertinent, into a new folder on a new external drive. She offered it to me, not as pressure to restart, but as a gesture, saying she knew she couldn't bring back what was lost, but she wanted to support my passion in a healthy way, if and when I ever felt ready. Our life now is happy. It's a word I hesitated to use for a long time, but it's true. We speak more openly and honestly than ever before. The trust, which I believed was beyond repair, has been restored, bit by bit. I wanted to share this outcome because so many of you were frank in your advice, and I felt an obligation to close the loop. For those who stated such a betrayal was insurmountable, I understand your perspective completely, and for a long time I believed it myself. But for us, with dedicated therapy, sincere remorse, a readiness to change from Carmilla, and a willingness from my side to eventually try and look beyond the act of the person I married, we discovered a way back. This is my final update. We are progressing, united, and content. Thank you, Reddit, for being a support system during the most difficult time. I wish you all well.